The emergence of Elamite civilization in the late 4th millennium BC represents one of humanity's earliest experiments in complex urban society, developing contemporaneously with the rise of Sumerian city-states in neighbouring Mesopotamia. Archaeological excavations at Susa, the principal site of early Elamite culture, have revealed a sophisticated society that produced one of the world's first writing systems, while establishing enduring patterns of political organisation and economic exchange that would define the region for millennia. The Proto-Elamite script, dating to approximately 3200–2900 BC, emerged during a period of rapid urbanisation and administrative complexity. Unlike the cuneiform system developing simultaneously in Mesopotamia, Proto-Elamite writing employed a distinct set of symbols that remain largely undeciphered despite decades of scholarly effort. The script appears on approximately 1,600 tablets, discovered primarily at Susa, with smaller collections found at Malyan, Yahya Tepe, and Shahri Sokhta. These tablets predominantly record administrative transactions, suggesting that writing developed primarily as a tool for managing increasingly complex economic activities, rather than for literary or religious purposes. The Proto-Elamite tablets reveal a sophisticated numerical system, employing different counting methods for various commodities. Archaeologists have identified distinct numerical notations for counting discrete objects, measuring grain, recording land areas, and tracking labour time. This mathematical complexity indicates a highly organised administrative apparatus capable of managing diverse economic activities across multiple settlements. The tablets frequently feature cylinder seals bearing intricate designs of animals, geometric patterns, and human figures, demonstrating advanced artistic traditions alongside administrative innovations. Susa's archaeological layers from this period reveal intensive construction activity, with large public buildings constructed using standardized brick sizes and sophisticated architectural techniques. The most significant structure from the Proto-Elamite period is a massive terrace measuring approximately 80 by 60 metres, constructed entirely of mud brick and rising nearly 10 metres above the surrounding plain. This monumental architecture required coordinated labour efforts involving hundreds of workers and substantial resource allocation, indicating centralised political authority capable of mobilising community resources for large-scale projects. The geographic foundations of Elamite civilization provided exceptional advantages for early urban development. The Khuzestan plain, stretching between the Zagros Mountains and the Mesopotamian lowlands, offered fertile alluvial soils deposited by seasonal flooding from rivers descending the mountain slopes. The Karun, Karkeh and Des rivers created a network of waterways that facilitated both irrigation agriculture and transportation, while the transition zone between plain and mountains provided access to diverse ecological niches and natural resources. The strategic position of Elamite territory between the Mesopotamian alluvium and the Iranian plateau created unique opportunities for controlling transcontinental trade routes. Merchants travelling between the resource-rich highlands and the agricultural lowlands necessarily passed through Elamite-controlled territory, generating customs revenues and facilitating cultural exchange. The mountain passes provided access to copper, tin, precious stones, and other valuable materials sought by Mesopotamian cities, while the fertile plains produced agricultural surpluses that could support specialised craftsmen and administrative personnel. Susa's location at the intersection of multiple river valleys made it a natural convergence point for regional trade networks. The site controlled access to the De-Luran Plain to the northwest, the Ram Hormuz Valley to the southeast, and mountain passes leading toward the central Iranian plateau. This geographic centrality, combined with abundant water resources and fertile soils, explains Susa's emergence as the preeminent urban centre in early Elamite territory. Archaeological surveys have identified numerous smaller settlements contemporary with Proto-Elamite Susa, revealing a hierarchical settlement pattern with Susa at its apex. Sites like Chokha-Mish, located 25 kilometers east of Susa, show evidence of substantial occupation during the late 4th millennium BC, including large public buildings and evidence of craft specialization. The site produced numerous proto-Elamite tablets and seals, indicating its integration into the broader administrative system centered at Susa. The development of irrigation system played a crucial role in supporting early Elamite urbanization. Archaeological evidence from the Deiluran Plain reveals extensive canal networks dating to the late 4th millennium BC, designed to capture and distribute seasonal floodwaters across agricultural fields. These irrigation systems required sophisticated engineering knowledge and coordinated maintenance efforts, contributing to the development of centralized administrative institutions capable of managing collective labor projects. The construction of irrigation canals followed careful topographic analysis, with channels designed to maintain optimal gradients for water flow while minimizing erosion and siltation. Archaeological mapping has revealed canal systems extending over 50 kilometers from their source points, serving agricultural areas supporting thousands of inhabitants. The maintenance of these systems required annual cleaning, repair of breach points, and coordination of water distribution among multiple communities, fostering the development of legal frameworks and administrative procedures that would characterize later Elamite political organization. Environmental factors significantly influenced the timing and character of early Elamite development. Paleoclimatic evidence suggests that the late 4th millennium BC experienced relatively favorable precipitation patterns, supporting expanded agricultural production and population growth. The seasonal flooding regime of rivers descending from the Zagros Mountains provided predictable water supplies for irrigation agriculture, while the mountain foothills offered pasturage for livestock and access to wild plant and animal resources. The exploitation of natural resources beyond agriculture contributed substantially to early Elamite economic development. Copper deposits in the Zagros foothills provided raw materials for tool and weapon production, while bitumen seeps near Susa supplied waterproofing materials essential for irrigation canal construction and ceramic production. Salt deposits in the region supported food preservation and provided a valuable trade commodity, while gypsum and limestone quarries supplied construction materials for monumental architecture. Trade relationships with neighbouring regions became increasingly important during the Proto-Elamite period. Archaeological evidence reveals extensive exchange networks, connecting Elamite settlements with communities across the Iranian Plateau, Central Asia, and the Indus Valley. Lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, carnelian beads from Gujarat, and silver from Anatolia appear in Proto-Elamite archaeological contexts, demonstrating participation in long-distance trade networks spanning thousands of kilometers. The organization of craft production during the Proto-Elamite period reveals increasing specialization and standardization. Pottery workshops at Susa produced distinctive ceramic styles characterized by geometric painted designs and standardized vessel forms. Metalworking evidence includes sophisticated bronze alloys and complex casting techniques, while textile production employed advanced weaving technologies and distinctive decorative patterns. This craft specialization required full-time artisans supported by agricultural surpluses, indicating substantial economic productivity and social stratification. Settlement patterns beyond Susa reveal the emergence of a multi-tiered urban hierarchy during the Proto-Elamite period. Major centres like Malyan in the Fars province controlled regional territories encompassing dozens of smaller villages and pastoral camps. These regional centres maintained administrative connections with Susa, while developing distinct local traditions and economic specializations. The distribution of Proto-Elamite tablets across multiple sites indicates a unified administrative system extending across several hundred kilometers of territory. The relationship between Elamite settlements and pastoral nomadic groups in the Zagros Mountains created additional complexity in early Elamite society. Archaeological evidence suggests regular interaction between settled agricultural communities and mobile pastoral groups, involving exchange of livestock products for manufactured goods and agricultural surpluses. These relationships provided Elamite settlements with access to highland resources while offering pastoral groups manufactured items and agricultural products unavailable in mountain environments. The transition from the Proto-Elamite period to the Old Elamite era marked a fundamental shift in the political landscape of southwestern Iran, as decentralized administrative centers gave way to dynastic kingdoms capable of projecting military power across vast territories. The Awan dynasty, emerging around 2700 BC, represented the first historically documented Elamite royal house, establishing patterns of kingship and territorial control that would define Elamite political organization for over a millennium. Archaeological evidence from Susa reveals dramatic changes in material culture during this period, including the construction of massive royal palaces, the development of distinctive burial practices for elite individuals, and the adoption of new artistic styles that reflected growing contact with Mesopotamian civilizations. The Awan kings ruled from Susa during a period of intense competition for control over trade routes connecting the Iranian plateau with Mesopotamian markets. Cuneiform sources from Mesopotamian archives provide the earliest written references to specific Elamite rulers, though the chronology remains problematic due to gaps in the historical record and conflicting accounts in different source traditions. The Sumerian king list mentions 12 Awan rulers, while Mesopotamian royal inscriptions reference several Elamite kings by name, including Enshakushana, who claimed dominion over territories extending from the Persian Gulf to the Zagros Mountains. The military capabilities of the Awan dynasty became apparent through their conflicts with expanding Mesopotamian powers, particularly the Akkadian Empire, established by Sargon of Akkad around 2334 BC. Sargon's conquest inscriptions describe extensive campaigns against Elamite territories, including the capture of Susa and the deportation of Elamite craftsmen to Akkadian cities. However, these victories proved temporary, as Elamite forces repeatedly regained control of their homeland and launched counterattacks against Akkadian positions in eastern Mesopotamia. The persistence of Elamite resistance demonstrates sophisticated military organization and the ability to mobilize substantial human and material resources for prolonged warfare. Archaeological excavations at Susa have uncovered evidence of destruction levels dating to the Akkadian period, including burned buildings and scattered weapons, supporting textual accounts of military campaigns. However, the rapid reconstruction of damaged areas and the continued production of distinctively Elamite artifacts indicate that Akkadian control remained superficial and short-lived. The Elamites developed defensive strategies that exploited their knowledge of local terrain, using mountain passes and river crossings to harass Akkadian supply lines while avoiding direct confrontation with superior Akkadian forces in open terrain. The political structure of the Awan dynasty reflected the geographic complexity of Elamite territory, with the king of Susa exercising varying degrees of control over regional governors who administered distant provinces. Inscriptions from this period reference multiple titles for Elamite rulers, including King of Anshan and Susa, indicating the dual nature of Elamite political authority. Anshan, located in the Fars province, controlled access to highland resources and trade routes leading to Central Asia, while Susa dominated the lowland plains and connections with Mesopotamia. This geographic division required sophisticated administrative coordination and diplomatic negotiation between different regional power centers. The establishment of Elamite political identity during the Awan period involved conscious differentiation from Mesopotamian cultural models, while simultaneously adopting useful administrative and military innovations. Elamite rulers commissioned inscriptions in their own language using cuneiform script adapted from Mesopotamian writing systems, creating official documents that asserted independent political authority while demonstrating cultural sophistication. These inscriptions employed distinctive formulaic language and religious references that distinguished Elamite royal ideology from Mesopotamian kingship traditions. Military technology during the Awan period reflected both indigenous innovations and selective adoption of foreign weapon systems. Archaeological evidence reveals sophisticated bronze working techniques, producing axes, spears, and daggers with distinctive Elamite decorative motifs. Elamite archers employed composite bows constructed from wood, horn, and sinew, providing superior range and penetrating power compared to simple wooden bows used by many contemporary armies. The mountainous terrain of much Elamite territory favoured mobile infantry tactics over the heavy infantry formations preferred by Mesopotamian armies, leading to the development of specialised mountain warfare techniques. The rise of the Shimashki dynasty around 2100 BC coincided with the collapse of Akkadian power and represented a period of unprecedented Elamite territorial expansion. The Shimashki kings, ruling from a capital whose precise location remains archaeologically unidentified, extended Elamite control across territories stretching from the Persian Gulf to the central Iranian plateau. This expansion required the development of new administrative mechanisms capable of governing diverse populations speaking different languages and practicing varying cultural traditions. Shimashki military campaigns targeted both Mesopotamian cities and highland territories previously outside Elamite control. King Kindatu launched attacks against Ur during the reign of Ur-Nammu, while his successors continued pressure against the third dynasty of Ur throughout its existence. These campaigns involved complex logistical planning, as Elamite armies had to transport supplies across hundreds of kilometers of difficult terrain while maintaining communication with their homeland bases. The success of these operations demonstrates sophisticated military organization and the ability to coordinate multiple army groups operating in different theaters simultaneously. The territorial expansion under the Shimashki dynasty created new challenges for Elamite administration, as conquered territories included populations with established political traditions and economic systems. Rather than imposing uniform administrative structures, Shimashki rulers adopted flexible governance strategies that preserved local institutions while ensuring ultimate Elamite authority. This approach required the development of diplomatic protocols for managing relationships with subordinate rulers and the creation of tribute systems that extracted resources without disrupting local production. Archaeological surveys in regions controlled by the Shimashki dynasty reveal evidence of substantial construction projects, including fortified administrative centres, road networks and irrigation systems. These infrastructure investments demonstrate long-term planning and substantial resource allocation, indicating that Shimashki expansion aimed at permanent territorial control rather than temporary raiding. The construction of fortified positions at strategic mountain passes suggests systematic efforts to control trade routes and prevent enemy infiltration into Elamite heartland territories. The consolidation of Shimashki power across southwestern Iran involved the integration of diverse economic systems and the standardization of weights, measures, and currency systems. Archaeological evidence reveals the spread of distinctive Elamite ceramic styles and metalworking techniques across territories under Shimashki control, indicating active efforts to promote cultural unification. However, regional variations persisted in many areas, suggesting that Shimashki administration balanced central control with local autonomy to maintain stability across their extensive territories. Cultural and religious developments during the Old Elamite period reflected both indigenous traditions and influences from expanding contact with neighbouring civilizations. The worship of Inshushinak, the patron deity of Susa, became increasingly prominent in official inscriptions and monumental art, serving as a symbol of Elamite political independence and cultural distinctiveness. Inshushinak's role as protector of Susa and judge of oaths made him particularly important for royal legitimacy, as Elamite kings claimed divine sanction for their authority through association with this powerful deity. The iconography associated with Inshushinak reveals sophisticated theological concepts and artistic traditions. Cylinder seals from the Old Elamite period depict the deity as a bearded figure wearing a horned crown, often accompanied by serpents and other symbols of divine power. These artistic representations demonstrate advanced carving techniques and complex symbolic systems that communicated religious and political messages to both literate elites and ordinary citizens. The widespread distribution of Inshushinak imagery across Elamite territories indicates systematic efforts to promote religious unity as a foundation for political cohesion. Temple construction during the Old Elamite period involved massive resource investments and sophisticated architectural planning. The Inshushinak temple at Susa, rebuilt multiple times during this period, featured elaborate decoration including glazed brick facades, carved stone reliefs, and precious metal fittings. Archaeological excavations have revealed foundation deposits containing valuable objects dedicated to the deity, including gold and silver vessels, carved ivory plaques, and imported gemstones. These deposits demonstrate the substantial wealth controlled by Elamite temples and their central role in economic and political life. Religious festivals and ceremonies provided opportunities for displaying royal power and reinforcing social hierarchies. Textual sources describe elaborate processions involving the king, court officials, and religious personnel, accompanied by music, dancing, and ritual offerings. These ceremonies required extensive preparation and coordination, involving craftsmen who produced ceremonial objects, farmers who supplied ritual foods, and administrators who organized logistics. The scale and complexity of these events demonstrate the organizational capabilities of Elamite institutions and their ability to mobilize community resources for religious and political purposes. The development of distinctive Elamite artistic traditions during the Old Elamite period involved both innovation and selective borrowing from neighboring cultures. Elamite sculptors developed characteristic styles for representing human figures, animals, and geometric patterns that distinguish their work from contemporary Mesopotamian and Iranian artistic traditions. These stylistic innovations appeared across multiple media, including stone carving, metalwork, ceramic decoration, and textile production, indicating systematic artistic training and the existence of specialized workshops serving royal and religious patrons. Metalworking achieved particular sophistication during the Old Elamite period, with Elamite craftsmen producing bronze objects of exceptional quality and artistic merit. Archaeological excavations have uncovered elaborate bronze vessels decorated with animal figures, geometric patterns, and religious symbols executed with remarkable technical skill. The production of these objects required advanced knowledge of alloy composition, casting techniques, and finishing processes, indicating the existence of specialized workshops with access to high-quality raw materials and skilled artisans. Economic systems during the Old Elamite period combined agricultural production, craft specialization, and long-distance trade to create substantial wealth that supported royal courts, religious institutions, and military forces. The fertile plains of Khuzestan continued to provide the agricultural foundation for Elamite society, with irrigation systems expanded and improved to support growing urban populations. Archaeological evidence reveals sophisticated water management techniques, including the construction of underground channels that transported water from mountain sources to agricultural areas in the plains. Trade networks connecting Elam with distant regions expanded significantly during the Old Elamite period, reflecting both increased demand for foreign goods and improved transportation infrastructure. Elamite merchants established trading posts across the Iranian plateau and maintained regular contact with communities in Central Asia, the Indus Valley, and Anatolia. These commercial relationships involved the exchange of manufactured goods, raw materials, and luxury items, generating customs revenues and tribute payments that enriched Elamite royal treasuries. The organization of long-distance trade required sophisticated commercial institutions, including standardized weights and measures, legal frameworks for contract enforcement, and diplomatic protocols for negotiating trading rights with foreign governments. Archaeological evidence reveals the use of distinctive Elamite seals for authenticating commercial documents and the development of accounting systems for tracking complex transactions involving multiple parties and various commodities. These commercial innovations demonstrate advanced understanding of market mechanisms and the ability to coordinate economic activities across vast distances. The collapse of the Shimashki dynasty around 1970 BC precipitated a fundamental reorganization of Elamite political structures, giving rise to the innovative Sukalma system that would govern Elam for nearly 5 centuries. This new administrative framework represented a radical departure from traditional monarchical rule, establishing a triumvirate leadership structure that distributed power among 3 principal offices: the Sukalma, the Sukal of Elam and Shimashki, and the Sukal of Susa. Archaeological evidence from Susa and other major centres reveals extensive construction projects and cultural developments during this period, indicating unprecedented prosperity and political stability under the Sukalma administration. The Sukalma held supreme executive authority within this triumvirate system, functioning as the ultimate decision-maker for military campaigns, diplomatic negotiations, and major administrative policies. Unlike previous Elamite rulers who claimed divine kingship, the Sukalma derived legitimacy from institutional position rather than hereditary right or religious sanction. This office typically rotated among members of prominent Elamite families, though specific succession mechanisms remain unclear from available textual sources. The Sukalma maintained residence at various locations depending on political circumstances, with documented stays at Susa, Anshan, and other major centres throughout Elamite territory. The Sukal of Elam and Shimashki administered the highland territories that provided access to mineral resources, pastoral products, and trade routes connecting the Iranian plateau with Central Asian markets. This position required extensive knowledge of mountain geography, tribal relationships, and seasonal migration patterns that affected both security and economic activities in highland regions. Archaeological surveys have identified numerous administrative centres in highland areas during the Sukalma period, including fortified compounds that served as regional headquarters for tax collection, military recruitment, and judicial proceedings. The Sukal of Susa controlled the lowland territories that generated the agricultural surplus supporting Elamite urban populations and provided access to Mesopotamian trade networks. This office administered the complex irrigation systems that distributed water from Zagros rivers across agricultural fields, coordinated seasonal labour requirements for planting and harvesting, and managed relationships with pastoral groups who moved their herds through agricultural areas during specific times of year. The Sukal of Susa also supervised craft production workshops that manufactured goods for both domestic consumption and export to foreign markets. This triumvirate structure created built-in checks and balances that prevented any single individual from accumulating excessive power while ensuring coordination among different geographic regions with distinct economic interests and security concerns. Major policy decisions required consultation among all 3 officials, with mechanisms for resolving disputes through council meetings that included representatives from various administrative districts. Archaeological evidence suggests that this system proved remarkably stable, as construction projects and administrative records show consistent patterns over extended periods, without the disruptions typical of dynastic transitions. The distribution of administrative responsibilities among the 3 Sukal offices reflected sophisticated understanding of Elamite territorial geography and economic systems. Highland regions required different management approaches than lowland agricultural areas, while the unique position of Susa as both administrative centre and commercial hub demanded specialised attention to urban governance issues. This geographic specialisation allowed each sukal to develop expertise in their respective domains while maintaining overall policy coordination through regular consultation and shared decision-making processes. Territorial expansion under the Sukalma system proceeded through systematic campaigns that extended Elamite control across territories stretching from the Persian Gulf to the central Iranian plateau. Archaeological evidence from sites like Haft Tepe and Kabnak reveals substantial construction activities during the early Sukalma period, including administrative complexes, residential quarters, and defensive installations that supported expanded territorial control. These construction projects required coordinated planning and resource allocation among the three Sukal offices, demonstrating effective institutional cooperation in pursuit of shared strategic objectives. The Sukalma administration established diplomatic relationships with major contemporary powers through carefully negotiated treaties that balanced Elamite interests against the territorial ambitions of neighbouring kingdoms. Relations with Babylon proved particularly complex, as both powers sought to control lucrative trade routes while avoiding costly military confrontations that could disrupt commercial activities. Diplomatic correspondence preserved in Babylonian archives reveals sophisticated negotiation strategies employed by Elamite representatives, including the use of marriage alliances, tribute arrangements, and territorial concessions to maintain peaceful relationships. Marriage diplomacy became a crucial tool for Elamite foreign policy during the Sukalma period, with royal women from prominent Elamite families married to rulers of allied kingdoms to cement political agreements and establish communication channels between courts. These marriages created kinship networks that facilitated diplomatic communication and provided mechanisms for resolving disputes through family mediation rather than military confrontation. Archaeological evidence from royal burial sites reveals elaborate grave goods associated with foreign royal women, indicating their high status within Elamite court society and their important role in international relations. Treaty negotiations with Mari, a major commercial centre on the Euphrates River, established frameworks for regulating trade activities and resolving commercial disputes between Elamite and Mesopotamian merchants. These agreements specified procedures for handling currency exchange, quality standards for traded goods, and legal mechanisms for enforcing contracts across international boundaries. The complexity of these commercial treaties demonstrates sophisticated understanding of market mechanisms and the economic benefits of maintaining stable trading relationships with distant partners. Diplomatic relations with smaller kingdoms along Elam's borders involved different strategies adapted to local political conditions and economic interests. Some territories were incorporated through negotiated agreements that preserved local ruling dynasties while establishing Elamite suzerainty, while others were conquered through military campaigns and subjected to direct administrative control. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Sukalma administration employed flexible governance strategies that balanced central authority with local autonomy depending on specific regional circumstances and strategic considerations. The architectural achievements of the Sukalma period reflect both the substantial resources available to Elamite rulers and their commitment to monumental construction projects that demonstrated political power and cultural sophistication. The great ziggurat at Choghazanbil, constructed during the reign of Untashnapirisha around 1340 BC, represents the pinnacle of Elamite architectural achievement and one of the best preserved ziggurats from the ancient world. This massive structure, rising approximately 60 metres above the surrounding plain, required millions of mud bricks and decades of construction work involving hundreds of skilled craftsmen and labourers. The Choghazanbil complex extended far beyond the central ziggurat, encompassing multiple temples, residential quarters, administrative buildings, and defensive walls that created a complete ceremonial city dedicated to the worship of Inshushinak and other Elamite deities. Archaeological excavations have revealed sophisticated urban planning that integrated religious, administrative, and residential functions within a carefully designed spatial framework. The complex included advanced water management systems, paved streets, and drainage networks that maintained sanitary conditions for large populations during religious festivals and ceremonial occasions. Construction techniques employed at Çoghazanbil demonstrate advanced engineering knowledge and sophisticated organizational capabilities. The ziggurat's foundation incorporated multiple layers of different materials designed to provide stable support for the massive superstructure, while preventing moisture damage from groundwater infiltration. Builders used standardized brick sizes and mortar compositions that ensured structural integrity across the entire complex, while decorative elements included glazed bricks, carved stone reliefs, and metal fittings that created visually impressive facades. Palace construction during the Sukalmar period involved elaborate architectural programs that combined functional administrative requirements with symbolic representations of political authority. The palace complex at Haftepe, built during the 14th century BC, featured multiple courtyards surrounded by reception halls, residential quarters, storage facilities, and workshops that supported court activities. Archaeological excavations have revealed sophisticated ventilation systems, decorative tilework, and elaborate drainage networks that maintained comfortable living conditions for court personnel and visiting dignitaries. The integration of religious and administrative functions within Sukalmar palace complexes reflects the important role of ceremonial activities in Elamite political culture. Palace chapels provided spaces for royal religious observances, while large reception halls accommodated diplomatic ceremonies and court festivals that reinforced social hierarchies and political relationships. Archaeological evidence reveals the use of precious materials including gold leaf, carved ivory, and imported gemstones in palace decoration, demonstrating the substantial wealth controlled by Sukalmar rulers and their commitment to displaying political power through architectural magnificence. Cultural flourishing during the Sukalmar period encompassed multiple areas of technological and artistic development that established new standards for craftsmanship and intellectual achievement. Advances in metallurgy produced bronze objects of exceptional quality and artistic sophistication, including elaborate vessels, weapons, and ceremonial objects that combined technical excellence with distinctive Elamite decorative traditions. Archaeological analysis of bronze artifacts reveals sophisticated understanding of alloy compositions and casting techniques that produced objects with superior strength and durability compared to earlier periods. The development of new bronze working techniques enabled Elamite craftsmen to produce larger and more complex objects than previously possible. Archaeological excavations have uncovered bronze vessels measuring over 50 centimeters in diameter, with walls less than 2 millimeters thick, demonstrating remarkable technical skill in metalworking processes. These achievements required advanced knowledge of furnace design, temperature control, and finishing techniques that represented significant innovations in ancient metallurgical practice. Sculptural arts reached new levels of sophistication during the Sukalmar period, with stone carvers producing relief sculptures and freestanding statues that combined realistic representation with distinctive Elamite stylistic conventions. The famous bronze and copper statue of Queen Napira Su, wife of Antashnapirisha, demonstrates advanced casting techniques and artistic vision that created one of the masterpieces of ancient Near Eastern sculpture. This life-sized figure, weighing approximately 1,750 kilograms, required sophisticated foundry operations and finishing processes that showcase the technical capabilities of Sukalmar period craftsmen. The development of Middle Elamite linear script during this period represented a significant advancement in Elamite intellectual culture and administrative capabilities. This writing system, derived from earlier Mesopotamian cuneiform traditions but adapted for the specific requirements of the Elamite language, enabled more efficient record-keeping and communication across the extensive territories controlled by the Sukalma administration. Archaeological discoveries of administrative archives written in Middle Elamite script provide detailed insights into economic activities, legal proceedings, and diplomatic correspondence that illuminate the sophisticated institutional structures of Sukalma governance. Middle Elamite inscriptions reveal complex legal frameworks that regulated property ownership, commercial transactions, and family relationships within Elamite society. These legal documents demonstrate sophisticated understanding of contractual obligations, inheritance rights, and dispute resolution mechanisms that maintain social stability and economic productivity. The standardization of legal terminology and procedural requirements across different regions indicates effective institutional coordination and the successful implementation of uniform administrative practices throughout Elamite territory. The expansion of literacy during the Sukalma period created new opportunities for cultural expression and intellectual development. Archaeological evidence suggests that scribal schools operated in major administrative centres, training personnel for government service while preserving and transmitting literary and religious traditions. The production of literary texts in Middle Elamite script includes religious hymns, historical chronicles, and administrative manuals that provide insights into Elamite intellectual culture and educational practices. Economic prosperity during the Sukalma period supported unprecedented levels of craft specialization and artistic production. Archaeological evidence reveals the operation of specialized workshops producing textiles, ceramics, metalwork, and carved objects for both domestic consumption and export to foreign markets. These workshops employed advanced production techniques and maintained quality standards that established Elamite manufactured goods as premium products in international trade networks. The organization of craft production involved sophisticated supply chains that coordinated raw material procurement, manufacturing processes, and distribution networks across extensive geographic areas. Archaeological analysis of workshop sites reveals evidence of standardized tools, production techniques, and quality control measures that ensured consistent output, meeting specific market requirements. The scale of these operations indicates substantial capital investment and long-term planning that created sustainable competitive advantages for Elamite producers in international markets. The establishment of Kassite rule in Babylon around 1595 BC fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape of the ancient Near East, creating new opportunities and challenges for Elamite political development. The Kassites, a people of uncertain origin who likely descended from the Zagros Mountains, brought different administrative traditions and diplomatic approaches that initially disrupted established patterns of Mesopotamian Elamite interaction. Unlike their Babylonian predecessors, who had maintained complex but predictable relationships with the Sukalma administration, the Kassite rulers pursued policies that alternated between aggressive expansion and diplomatic accommodation, forcing Elamite leaders to adapt their strategies for managing western frontiers. The early decades of Kassite rule coincided with internal political difficulties within Elam that weakened central authority and fragmented the previously unified Sukalma system. Archaeological evidence from Susa reveals reduced construction activity and simplified administrative procedures during the late 16th and early 15th centuries BC, indicating decreased resources available for major public works projects. The triumvirate system that had provided stable governance for nearly 4 centuries began showing signs of strain as competing regional interests challenged central coordination and territorial control became increasingly difficult to maintain across Elam's extensive domains. Regional governors who had previously operated within the Sukalma framework began asserting greater autonomy, particularly in highland areas where geographic isolation made central oversight problematic. Archaeological surveys in Fars province reveal evidence of local construction projects undertaken without apparent coordination with Susa-based authorities, including fortified compounds and administrative centres that suggest independent resource allocation and planning. These developments indicate a gradual decentralisation of power that would eventually lead to the emergence of new dynastic structures better adapted to changing political circumstances. The disruption of traditional trade relationships with Mesopotamia under early Kassite rule created economic pressures that contributed to Elamite political instability. Commercial archives from this period show reduced volumes of long-distance trade and changes in the types of goods exchanged between Elamite and Mesopotamian merchants. The Kassites initially imposed different taxation systems and commercial regulations that disrupted established trading partnerships, forcing Elamite merchants to develop new market relationships and adapt to altered economic conditions. These adjustments required time and resources that strained Elamite administrative capabilities during an already challenging political transition. Archaeological evidence from major Elamite commercial centres reveals changes in material culture that reflect reduced access to foreign luxury goods and manufactured items. Pottery assemblages from the early Kassite period show increased reliance on local production and simplified decorative schemes compared to the elaborate imported ceramics characteristic of the Sukalma era. Metalwork from this period similarly demonstrates reduced use of imported materials and simplified manufacturing techniques, suggesting that craft workshops faced difficulties obtaining high-quality raw materials and maintaining previous production standards. The emergence of the Igihalkid dynasty around 1450 BC marked the beginning of Elamite political recovery and the establishment of new institutional structures adapted to changed regional circumstances. The Igihalkid rulers abandoned the complex triumvirate system of the Sukalma period in favour of more centralised monarchical authority, though they retained elements of regional administration that acknowledged geographic and cultural diversity within Elamite territory. Archaeological evidence from Haft Tepe reveals extensive construction projects undertaken during the early Igihalkid period, including palace complexes and administrative buildings that demonstrate renewed royal resources and political stability. King Tepti Aha, one of the earliest documented Igihalkid rulers, initiated military campaigns that restored Elamite control over territories that had gained independence during the period of central weakness. Cuneiform inscriptions describe successful operations against highland tribes and the re-establishment of tribute relationships with previously autonomous regions. These campaigns required substantial military resources and logistical capabilities, indicating that the Igihalkid administration had successfully consolidated sufficient power to project force across extensive geographic areas and maintain territorial integrity against various challenges. The Igihalkid military organisation incorporated lessons learned from previous conflicts while adapting to new tactical requirements imposed by changing political circumstances. Archaeological excavations at military sites reveal evidence of improved fortification designs that incorporated multiple defensive lines and sophisticated siege-resistant features. Weapons assemblages from this period show technological innovations, including improved bronze alloys and new weapon types adapted for mountain warfare and siege operations. These military developments demonstrate systematic efforts to enhance Elamite defensive capabilities and offensive potential against various types of enemies. The construction of new administrative centres during the Igihalkid period reflects deliberate efforts to establish more effective territorial control and improve communication between central authorities and regional governors. Archaeological surveys have identified numerous sites with Igihalkid period construction phases, including compounds designed to house administrative personnel, store tax revenues, and provide facilities for regional assemblies and judicial proceedings. These installations were strategically located to control key transportation routes and provide rapid communication with central authorities during emergencies or routine administrative requirements. The development of improved road networks during the Igi-Halkid period facilitated more effective administration and military operations across Elamite territory. Archaeological evidence reveals systematic road construction projects that connected major administrative centres with standardised way stations, providing accommodation and supply facilities for official travellers. These infrastructure investments required substantial resource allocation and coordinated planning that demonstrates renewed institutional capabilities and long-term strategic thinking by Igi-Halkid administrators. The transition from Igi-Halkid to Shutrukid rule around 1350 BC occurred through mechanisms that remain unclear from available textual sources, though archaeological evidence suggests continuity in administrative practices and construction projects that indicates peaceful succession rather than violent political upheaval. The Shutrukid dynasty would preside over the most spectacular period of Middle Elamite political and cultural achievement, establishing new standards for royal power and territorial expansion that surpassed even the accomplishments of the Sukalma period. Untashnapirisha, the most celebrated Shutrukid ruler, ascended to power around 1340 BC and immediately launched ambitious construction projects that demonstrated unprecedented royal resources and organisational capabilities. The massive ceremonial complex at Durantash, modern Choka Zanbil, represents the pinnacle of ancient Elamite architectural achievement and one of the most impressive religious centres constructed anywhere in the ancient Near East during the 2nd millennium BC. The central ziggurat, dedicated to Inshushinak, rose through 5 distinct levels to a height of approximately 60 metres, requiring millions of carefully manufactured bricks and decades of coordinated construction work. The Durantash complex extended across an area of approximately 100 hectares, encompassing multiple temple precincts, residential quarters for religious personnel, administrative buildings, and defensive installations that created a complete ceremonial city. Archaeological excavations have revealed sophisticated urban planning that integrated religious, administrative, and residential functions within carefully designed spatial relationships. The complex included advanced hydraulic systems that supplied fresh water to all areas while maintaining drainage networks that prevented flooding during seasonal rains. Paved streets connected different functional areas, while defensive walls with multiple gates controlled access and provided security for the substantial populations that gathered during major religious festivals. The construction techniques employed at Durantash demonstrate remarkable engineering sophistication and organisational capabilities. The ziggurat's foundation incorporated multiple construction phases using different materials and techniques designed to provide stable support for the massive superstructure while preventing structural failure from earthquakes or settlement. Builders employed standardised brick sizes manufactured in specialised workshops that maintained consistent quality standards, while mortar compositions were carefully formulated to provide optimal bonding strength and weather resistance. Decorative elements included glazed brick facades with intricate geometric patterns, carved stone reliefs depicting religious scenes, and metal fittings fabricated from bronze and precious metals. The religious significance of Durantash extended beyond its architectural magnificence to encompass complex theological concepts and ceremonial practices that reinforced Elamite cultural identity and royal legitimacy. The ziggurats served as the earthly residence of Inshushinak, whose elevated position above the surrounding landscape symbolised his supreme authority over Elamite territory and people. Archaeological evidence reveals elaborate ritual deposits within the ziggurat's foundation, including precious objects, inscribed tablets, and animal remains that demonstrate sophisticated religious practices and substantial resource investment in ceremonial activities. The temple precincts surrounding the central ziggurat house shrines dedicated to various Elamite deities, creating a comprehensive religious centre that served populations from across Elamite territory. Archaeological excavations have uncovered evidence of specialized workshops within the complex that produced religious objects, ceremonial vessels, and ritual implements required for temple services. These workshops employed skilled craftsmen who maintained high-quality standards and developed distinctive artistic styles that combined traditional Elamite motifs with innovations reflecting contemporary religious and political developments. Untashnaparisha's military campaigns extended Elamite territorial control across regions that had never previously acknowledged Elamite authority, including areas of the central Iranian plateau and territories along the Persian Gulf coast. Cuneiform inscriptions describe successful operations against numerous enemies, including highland tribes, coastal settlements, and rival kingdoms that had challenged Elamite interests. These campaigns required sophisticated logistical planning and coordination among multiple army groups operating across vast distances in difficult terrain conditions. The military organization developed under Untashnapirisha incorporated technological innovations and tactical adaptations that enhanced Elamite combat effectiveness against various types of opponents. Archaeological evidence reveals improvements in weapons technology, including new bronze alloys that provided superior strength and durability for swords, spears, and arrowheads. Armour designs incorporated overlapping scales and reinforced joints that provided enhanced protection while maintaining mobility requirements for mountain warfare and siege operations. Siege equipment included advanced battering rams, scaling ladders, and protective shields that enabled successful attacks against fortified positions. The expansion of Elamite territorial control under the Shutrukid dynasty required the development of new administrative mechanisms capable of governing diverse populations with different cultural traditions and economic systems. Rather than imposing uniform administrative structures, Shutrukid rulers employed flexible governance strategies that preserved local institutions while ensuring ultimate Elamite authority through tribute requirements, military service obligations, and judicial oversight. This approach required sophisticated diplomatic skills and cultural sensitivity that balanced central control with local autonomy to maintain stability across extensive and diverse territories. The integration of conquered territories into the Elamite administrative system involved the establishment of regional centres staffed by Elamite officials who supervised local governors and monitored compliance with central policies. Archaeological evidence reveals construction of administrative compounds in newly conquered areas, including facilities for tax collection, judicial proceedings, and military recruitment. These installations were designed to project Elamite authority while providing practical facilities for governance activities and communication with central authorities. Religious and cultural developments during the Middle Elamite period reflected both continuity with earlier traditions and innovations, responding to changing political circumstances and expanded territorial control. The elevation of Inshushinak to supreme deity status within the Elamite pantheon served multiple functions, providing religious sanction for royal authority, while creating a unifying symbol that transcended regional differences and cultural variations across Elamite territory. Archaeological evidence reveals the systematic promotion of Inshushinak worship through temple construction, artistic representation, and ceremonial practices that establish consistent religious observances throughout Elamite domains. The integration of Mesopotamian deities into the Elamite pantheon demonstrates sophisticated theological thinking and practical political considerations that balance religious innovation with traditional beliefs. Deities like Marduk and Ishtar were incorporated into Elamite religious practices through syncretistic processes that identified them with existing Elamite gods while preserving their distinctive characteristics and cult requirements. This religious flexibility facilitated the integration of populations with different religious traditions, while maintaining the essential features of Elamite cultural identity and political legitimacy. Archaeological evidence from temple sites reveals the development of new ceremonial practices that combined traditional Elamite religious observances with elements derived from Mesopotamian and other foreign traditions. These hybrid ceremonies required specialized knowledge and training that led to the establishment of priestly schools and the codification of religious procedures in written manuals. The complexity of these religious developments indicates substantial intellectual activity and institutional sophistication that supported the cultural achievements of the Middle Elamite period. The artistic achievements of the Middle Elamite period encompassed multiple media and established new standards for technical excellence and aesthetic sophistication. Bronze working reached unprecedented levels of complexity, with craftsmen producing elaborate vessels, ceremonial weapons, and sculptural objects that combined advanced metallurgical techniques with distinctive Elamite decorative traditions. The famous bronze and copper statue of Queen Napirasu represents the pinnacle of Middle Elamite sculptural achievement, demonstrating remarkable technical skill in casting processes and artistic vision in compositional design. Ceramic production during the Middle Elamite period incorporated new decorative techniques and vessel forms that reflected both indigenous innovations and selective borrowing from foreign artistic traditions. Archaeological assemblages reveal sophisticated painting techniques using multiple colours and complex geometric patterns that required specialized knowledge and careful execution. The standardization of ceramic forms across different regions indicates effective quality control and the operation of centralized production facilities that supplied markets throughout Elamite territory. The accession of Shutruk-Nahunta, Rust, around 1190 BC, inaugurated the most spectacular phase of Elamite military expansion and cultural achievement in the civilization's long history. Unlike his predecessors, who had focused primarily on consolidating territorial control within traditional Elamite boundaries, Shutruk-Nahunta pursued aggressive expansionist policies that transformed Elam from a regional power into a dominant imperial force capable of challenging the greatest kingdoms of the ancient Near East. Archaeological evidence from Susa reveals massive construction projects initiated during his early reign, including extensive palace renovations and the creation of new administrative quarters designed to accommodate the expanded bureaucratic apparatus required for governing conquered territories across Mesopotamia and the Iranian plateau. The military machine that Shutruk-Nahunta assembled represented a revolutionary advancement in Elamite warfare capabilities, incorporating technological innovations and organizational reforms that provided decisive advantages over contemporary enemies. Weapons assemblages from this period reveal systematic improvements in metallurgy, with bronze alloys achieving superior hardness and durability through refined smelting techniques and carefully controlled cooling processes. Elamite smiths developed new sword designs featuring extended tangs and reinforced hilts that provided better balance and striking power, while spear points incorporated hollow-ground blades that enhanced penetration capabilities against improved armor systems employed by Mesopotamian armies. The organizational structure of Shutrukid armies reflected sophisticated understanding of combined arms tactics and logistical requirements for extended campaigns across vast distances. Infantry formations included specialized units equipped for different tactical roles, including heavily armored shock troops for frontal assaults, mobile archer units for harassment and pursuit operations, and engineering specialists trained in siege warfare techniques. Archaeological excavations at military installations reveal evidence of systematic training facilities where soldiers practice coordinated maneuvers and siege operations using standardized equipment and established tactical procedures. The logistical capabilities developed under Shutruk-Nahunta enabled Elamite armies to maintain extended campaigns far from their homeland bases without experiencing the supply shortages that had limited previous military operations. Archaeological surveys along major campaign routes have identified supply depots and staging areas that provided food, weapons, and replacement equipment for advancing armies. These installations included granaries capable of storing thousands of tons of grain, workshops for repairing weapons and equipment, and corrals for maintaining the pack animals and cavalry horses essential for military mobility in mountainous terrain. The systematic nature of Shutrukid military preparations becomes evident through archaeological analysis of weapons production facilities that operated during this period. Excavations at specialized workshops reveal evidence of mass production techniques that standardized weapon types and maintained consistent quality standards across large quantities of military equipment. These facilities employed division of labor principles that assigned specific tasks to individual craftsmen, increasing production efficiency while ensuring that each weapon met established performance requirements. The scale of these operations indicates that Shutruk-Nahunta planned his military campaigns years in advance and invested substantial resources in creating the material foundation for sustained warfare. The first major test of Shutrukid military capabilities came with campaigns against Babylonian territories that had experienced political instability following the decline of Kassite authority. Shutruk-Nahunta exploited internal Babylonian conflicts by supporting rival claimants to the throne while simultaneously preparing for direct military intervention. Archaeological evidence from border regions reveals the construction of forward operating bases that provided staging areas for offensive operations while protecting Elamite territory from potential counterattacks. These installations featured sophisticated defensive designs, including multiple wall circuits, underground water supplies, and communication systems that enabled rapid coordination with central authorities. The invasion of Babylonia, around 1158 BC, represented the culmination of decades of military preparation and political maneuvering that positioned Elam for decisive intervention in Mesopotamian affairs. Shutruk-Nahunta's armies advanced along multiple routes that converged on major Babylonian cities, preventing effective coordination of defensive efforts while maintaining pressure across broad fronts. The speed and coordination of these operations demonstrate sophisticated command and control systems that enabled Elamite commanders to adapt their tactics to changing battlefield conditions while maintaining overall strategic coherence. The siege and capture of Babylon itself required advanced siege techniques and specialized equipment that showcased Elamite engineering capabilities. Archaeological evidence from the period reveals the development of improved battering rams featuring bronze-reinforced heads and protective housing that shielded operators from defensive fire. Siege towers incorporated multiple levels for archers and assault troops, while sophisticated counterweight systems enabled the deployment of heavy stone projectiles against fortified positions. The successful breach of Babylon's formidable defences demonstrated that Elamite military engineers had mastered the complex technical requirements of siege warfare against major urban centres. The systematic looting of Babylon following its capture revealed Shutruk-Nahunta's understanding of psychological warfare and the importance of symbolic victories in establishing imperial authority. The removal of the famous Code of Hammurabi Stele, along with numerous other monuments and religious objects, served multiple strategic purposes beyond simple material gain. These trophies provided tangible proof of Elamite victory that could be displayed in Susa to demonstrate royal power, while their removal from Babylon symbolically transferred divine sanction and historical legitimacy from Mesopotamian to Elamite rulers. The transportation of massive stone monuments across hundreds of kilometers of difficult terrain required sophisticated logistical planning and specialized equipment that demonstrates remarkable organizational capabilities. Archaeological analysis of the Code of Hammurabi Stele reveals evidence of careful preparation for its removal, including the construction of specialized sledges and the modification of transportation routes to accommodate oversized loads. The successful completion of these operations indicates that Elamite engineers possessed advanced knowledge of mechanical principles and construction techniques that enabled them to accomplish seemingly impossible tasks. The establishment of Elamite administration over conquered Babylonian territories required the development of new governance mechanisms that could manage populations with different cultural traditions and establish political expectations. Rather than imposing uniform Elamite administrative structures, Shutruk-Nahunte adopted flexible approaches that preserved local institutions while ensuring ultimate Elamite authority through carefully placed officials and strategic military garrisons. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of administrative compounds in major Babylonian cities, designed to house Elamite governors and their staffs while providing facilities for tax collection, judicial proceedings, and communication with Susa. The integration of Babylonian administrative personnel into Elamite governance structures demonstrates sophisticated understanding of the practical requirements for governing complex urban societies. Many Babylonian scribes, judges, and technical specialists were retained in their positions under Elamite supervision, providing continuity in essential services while facilitating the transfer of administrative knowledge to Elamite officials. This pragmatic approach minimized disruption to economic activities and social structures while enabling Elamite authorities to benefit from centuries of Mesopotamian administrative experience and institutional development. The military campaigns of Shutruk-Nahunte's sons, Kutir-Nahunte and Shilhak-in-Shushanak, extended Elamite territorial control across regions that had never previously acknowledged foreign domination. Archaeological evidence from sites across northern Mesopotamia reveals destruction levels dating to this period, followed by construction phases that reflect Elamite administrative presence and cultural influence. These campaigns required even more sophisticated logistical capabilities than previous operations, as Elamite armies operated at unprecedented distances from their homeland bases while maintaining effective coordination and supply lines. Kutir-Nahunte's operations against Assyrian territories demonstrated Elamite willingness to challenge the most powerful military forces of the contemporary Near East. Archaeological evidence from Assyrian sites reveals evidence of Elamite military presence, including distinctive weapons and equipment that confirm the extent of these campaigns. The temporary success of these operations against Assyrian forces, renowned for their military prowess and advanced siege techniques, indicates that Elamite military capabilities had reached levels that enabled them to compete successfully against any contemporary opponent under favourable circumstances. The administrative reforms implemented during the Shutrukid period created the institutional framework necessary for governing the expanded territories under Elamite control. The traditional dual monarchy system of Anshan and Susa was supplemented by new regional administrative divisions that reflected the geographic and cultural diversity of conquered territories. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of provincial centres equipped with standardised administrative facilities, including archives for record keeping, treasuries for tax collection, and residential quarters for appointed governors and their staffs. The development of improved communication systems enabled central authorities in Susa to maintain effective oversight of distant provinces while ensuring rapid transmission of orders and information across the expanded empire. Archaeological surveys have identified way stations and relay points along major routes that provided facilities for official messengers and maintained fresh horses for rapid travel. These installations included fortified compounds that protected valuable communications from bandits and enemy agents, while providing secure storage for official documents and diplomatic correspondence. The standardization of weights, measures, and currency systems across Elamite territories facilitated economic integration and simplified administrative procedures for tax collection and commercial regulation. Archaeological evidence reveals the widespread distribution of standardized measuring devices and the adoption of uniform accounting procedures that enabled efficient resource management across diverse economic systems. These administrative innovations required substantial institutional development and the training of numerous personnel in new procedures and technical requirements. The creation of a professional administrative class recruited from across Elamite territories provided the human resources necessary for governing the expanded empire, while creating career opportunities that attracted talented individuals to government service. Archaeological evidence from administrative centres reveals the operation of scribal schools and training facilities that prepared personnel for various administrative roles while maintaining consistent standards and procedures. The curriculum of these institutions included instruction in multiple languages, legal procedures, accounting methods, and diplomatic protocols that reflected the complex requirements of imperial administration. The monumental architecture constructed during the Shutrukid period reflected both the substantial resources available to Elamite rulers and their commitment to displaying imperial power through impressive construction projects. The expansion of the Inshushinak temple complex at Susa involved the addition of new ceremonial halls, administrative quarters, and residential facilities that created one of the largest religious centres in the ancient Near East. Archaeological excavations have revealed sophisticated architectural planning that integrated multiple construction phases while maintaining aesthetic coherence and functional efficiency throughout the expanded complex. The construction techniques employed in Shutrukid building projects demonstrate remarkable engineering capabilities and organisational sophistication. The use of fired brick in major construction projects represented significant advancement over earlier mud brick techniques, providing superior durability and weather resistance, while enabling more ambitious architectural designs. Archaeological analysis reveals sophisticated understanding of structural engineering principles, including the use of buttresses, arches, and foundation systems that provided stable support for multi-story buildings and heavy roof loads. Decorative programs in Shutrukid architecture incorporated artistic elements from across the expanded empire while maintaining distinctive Elamite stylistic traditions. Glazed brick facades featured complex geometric patterns and figural representations that combined traditional Elamite motifs with influences derived from Mesopotamian and other foreign artistic traditions. Archaeological evidence reveals the operation of specialized workshops that produced these decorative elements using advanced ceramic techniques and sophisticated firing procedures that achieve consistent colors and surface qualities. The royal inscriptions commissioned during the Shutrukid period provide detailed accounts of military campaigns, construction projects, and religious activities that demonstrate sophisticated literary traditions and historical consciousness. These texts, carved in stone and inscribed on metal objects, employed elaborate poetic language and complex narrative structures that showcase advanced literary skills and cultural sophistication. Archaeological discoveries of inscribed objects in various locations throughout Elamite territory indicate systematic efforts to promote royal achievements and establish historical records that would preserve Shutrukid accomplishments for future generations. The development of Middle Elamite artistic traditions during this period encompassed multiple media and established new standards for technical excellence and aesthetic achievement. Bronze working reached unprecedented levels of sophistication, with craftsmen producing elaborate ceremonial vessels, weapons, and sculptural objects that combined advanced metallurgical techniques with distinctive Elamite decorative traditions. Archaeological analysis reveals the use of complex alloy compositions and sophisticated casting techniques that enabled the production of large-scale sculptural works and intricate decorative objects with remarkable precision and artistic quality. The patronage of arts and crafts during the Shutrukid period created economic opportunities for skilled artisans while establishing Elamite cultural products as premium goods in international markets. Archaeological evidence reveals the operation of specialized workshops producing textiles, ceramics, metalwork and carved objects for both domestic consumption and export to foreign markets. These workshops employed advanced production techniques and maintained quality standards that established Elamite manufactured goods as symbols of luxury and sophistication throughout the ancient Near East. The diplomatic relationships established during the Shutrukid period reflected Elam's emergence as a major regional power capable of negotiating with other great kingdoms on equal terms. Correspondence preserved in various archives reveals sophisticated diplomatic protocols and negotiation strategies that balanced Elamite interests against the concerns of neighbouring powers while maintaining the flexibility necessary for adapting to changing political circumstances. These diplomatic activities required specialised knowledge of international law, cultural customs, and political traditions that demonstrate remarkable institutional sophistication and cultural awareness. Marriage alliances arranged during this period created kinship networks that facilitated diplomatic communication and provided mechanisms for resolving disputes through family mediation rather than military confrontation. Archaeological evidence from royal burial sites reveals elaborate grave goods associated with foreign royal women, indicating their high status within Elamite court society and their important role in maintaining international relationships. These marriage connections created lasting bonds between ruling families that influenced political decisions and military strategies for generations after their initial establishment. Trade relationships with distant regions expanded significantly during the Shutrukid period, reflecting both increased demand for foreign goods and improved transportation infrastructure that facilitated long-distance commerce. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of Elamite trading posts across the Iranian plateau and the maintenance of regular commercial contact with communities in Central Asia, the Indus Valley, and eastern Anatolia. These commercial relationships generated substantial revenues through customs duties and tribute payments, while providing access to luxury goods and raw materials unavailable within Elamite territory. The military confrontations with Assyria during the later Shutrukid period demonstrated both the remarkable achievements and ultimate limitations of Elamite imperial expansion. Archaeological evidence from border regions reveals the construction of extensive defensive installations designed to protect Elamite territory from Assyrian counterattacks, while providing bases for continued offensive operations. These fortifications incorporated advanced defensive designs including multiple wall circuits, underground tunnels, and sophisticated water management systems that enable defenders to withstand extended sieges while maintaining communication with relief forces and supply bases. The devastating invasion launched by Nebuchadnezzar I of Babylon around 1110 BC shattered the imperial edifice that the Shutrukid dynasty had constructed over the preceding century, marking the beginning of an irreversible decline that would fragment Elamite political unity and reduce the once mighty kingdom to a collection of competing local powers. Archaeological evidence from Susa reveals extensive destruction layers dating to this period, with burned administrative buildings, scattered weapons, and hastily buried treasure hoards, providing stark testimony to the violence that accompanied the Babylonian assault. The systematic nature of the destruction suggests that Nebuchadnezzar's forces deliberately targeted the symbols and infrastructure of Elamite imperial power, destroying not merely military installations, but also the administrative centres, religious complexes, and royal palaces that had served as the institutional foundation of Shutrukid rule. The Babylonian army that descended upon Elam represented a formidable military force, equipped with advanced siege techniques and motivated by decades of resentment against Elamite domination of Mesopotamian territories. Nebuchadnezzar's forces employed iron weapons that provided significant advantages over the bronze armaments that remained standard in Elamite arsenals, while their siege equipment incorporated technological innovations developed through extensive warfare against other regional powers. The speed with which Babylonian forces penetrated Elamite defences indicates systematic intelligence gathering and careful planning that exploited weaknesses in the defensive systems that had protected Elamite territory for generations. The destruction of Susa involved more than military conquest. It represented a deliberate attempt to erase the symbols of Elamite imperial achievement and transfer their legitimizing power to Babylonian rulers. The recovery of the famous Code of Hammurabi Stele, along with numerous other monuments that Shutrukid kings had transported from Babylon as trophies of victory, provided Nebuchadnezzar with tangible proof of his triumph, while symbolically reversing the humiliations that Babylon had suffered under Elamite domination. Archaeological excavations have revealed evidence of systematic looting that targeted not only valuable objects, but also administrative archives and religious texts that contained the institutional memory of Elamite governance and cultural traditions. The immediate aftermath of the Babylonian invasion created a power vacuum that existing Elamite institutions proved incapable of filling. The complex administrative apparatus that had governed territories stretching from the Persian Gulf to the central Iranian plateau collapsed almost immediately, as communication networks were severed and regional governors found themselves isolated from central authority. Archaeological evidence from provincial centres reveals abandonment of many administrative compounds during this period, with valuable objects hastily buried and official records destroyed to prevent their capture by advancing enemy forces. The fragmentation of central authority triggered a cascade of political disintegration that transformed the unified Elamite Empire into a patchwork of autonomous regions governed by local strongmen who claimed legitimacy through various combinations of traditional authority, military power, and religious sanction. In the highland regions of Fars province, local governors who had administered territories on behalf of Shutrukid kings declared independence and established hereditary dynasties that controlled strategic mountain passes and trade routes. Archaeological surveys reveal the construction of new, fortified compounds during this period, designed to serve as regional power centres independent of Susa's authority and capable of defending against both external enemies and rival Elamite claimants. The emergence of these local dynasties reflected the geographic and cultural diversity that had always characterized Elamite territory but had been suppressed under imperial administration. Highland regions with predominantly pastoral economies developed different political structures than lowland agricultural areas, while communities with distinct ethnic and linguistic identities asserted autonomy that had been impossible under centralized rule. Archaeological evidence reveals the revival of local artistic traditions and religious practices that had been standardized during the imperial period, indicating conscious efforts to establish distinctive cultural identities that legitimized political independence from Susa. The kingdom of Anshan, which had served as a co-capital alongside Susa during the height of Elamite power, emerged as one of the most significant successor states during this period of fragmentation. Archaeological excavations at Malyan, the site of ancient Anshan, reveal continued construction activity and administrative operations that indicate substantial autonomy from Susa-based authority. The rulers of Anshan maintained control over extensive highland territories and continued to use traditional Elamite royal titles, though their actual authority extended over much smaller areas than their imperial predecessors had governed. The political organisation that developed in Anshan during this period reflected adaptation to reduced resources and territorial control, while maintaining claims to legitimacy based on historical precedent and traditional authority. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of modest palace complexes that incorporated elements of imperial architectural traditions, while acknowledging practical limitations imposed by reduced economic resources. Administrative archives from this period show simplified bureaucratic procedures and reduced territorial scope, though the continued use of Middle Elamite script and traditional administrative terminology indicates efforts to preserve institutional continuity despite changed circumstances. The lowland regions around Susa experienced different patterns of political fragmentation that reflected their distinct economic foundations and strategic vulnerabilities. The fertile agricultural plains that had supported large urban populations became contested territories where competing claimants struggled for control over irrigation systems and trade routes that remained economically valuable despite political disruption. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of numerous small fortified settlements during this period, designed to protect agricultural communities from raiding while providing bases for local military leaders who competed for regional dominance. The breakdown of centralized irrigation management created particular challenges for lowland agricultural communities that depended on coordinated water distribution systems for economic survival. Archaeological surveys reveal evidence of canal abandonment and agricultural decline in many areas, as local communities lack the organizational capabilities and resources necessary to maintain complex hydraulic infrastructure without central coordination. The resulting economic disruption contributed to population movements and social instability that further complicated efforts to establish stable local governance structures. Economic disruption during this period extended far beyond the immediate effects of military destruction to encompass fundamental changes in trade patterns and resource availability that undermine the foundations of Elamite prosperity. The collapse of imperial administration severed commercial relationships that had connected Elamite merchants with markets across the ancient Near East, while political instability made long-distance travel dangerous and unpredictable. Archaeological evidence from commercial centres reveals sharp declines in the volume and variety of traded goods, with luxury items and foreign manufactured products becoming increasingly rare in archaeological assemblages from this period. The disruption of traditional trade routes forced Elamite communities to develop new economic strategies based on local resources and regional exchange networks that operated on much smaller scales than the imperial commercial systems they replaced. Archaeological analysis of pottery assemblages reveals increased reliance on local production and simplified manufacturing techniques, while metalwork shows reduced access to high-quality raw materials and less sophisticated production methods. These changes indicate fundamental shifts in economic organization that reflected both reduced resources and altered political circumstances that made traditional commercial activities impossible to maintain. Climate change during the late 2nd millennium BC contributed additional pressures that complicated recovery efforts and influenced patterns of political fragmentation. Paleoclimatic evidence suggests that the region experienced increased aridity and more variable precipitation patterns that reduced agricultural productivity and made irrigation systems less reliable. Archaeological evidence from agricultural sites reveals changes in cropping patterns and settlement locations that reflect adaptation to altered environmental conditions, while pollen analysis indicates shifts in vegetation patterns that affected both agricultural and pastoral activities. The environmental challenges of this period particularly affected highland pastoral communities that depended on predictable seasonal rainfall for maintaining livestock herds and accessing traditional grazing areas. Archaeological surveys reveal changes in settlement patterns that reflect adaptation to altered precipitation regimes, with some communities relocating to areas with more reliable water sources, while others modified their economic strategies to reduce dependence on climate-sensitive activities. These environmental pressures contributed to population movements and territorial conflicts that further destabilized political conditions and complicated efforts to establish stable governance structures. Population movements during this period reflected both the immediate effects of military destruction and longer-term adaptations to changed economic and environmental conditions. Archaeological evidence reveals the abandonment of many urban centres and the establishment of new settlements in previously marginal areas, indicating substantial demographic shifts that altered the distribution of population across Elamite territory. These movements created refugee populations that strained the resources of host communities while contributing to social tensions and political instability in regions that had previously enjoyed relative stability. The displacement of skilled craftsmen and administrative personnel from destroyed urban centres created particular challenges for communities attempting to maintain essential services and economic activities. Archaeological evidence reveals the dispersal of specialised knowledge and technical skills as craftsmen relocated to new areas and adapted their techniques to local conditions and available resources. While this dispersal contributed to the spread of technological knowledge and artistic traditions, it also represented a loss of the concentrated expertise and institutional memory that had supported the sophisticated achievements of the imperial period. Despite the political chaos and economic disruption of this period, important elements of Elamite cultural identity and religious traditions demonstrated remarkable resilience and continuity. Archaeological evidence reveals the continued operation of religious centres and the maintenance of traditional ceremonial practices, even in areas experiencing severe political instability. Local communities invested scarce resources in temple maintenance and religious festivals that preserved connections to Elamite cultural traditions while providing sources of social cohesion and collective identity during times of uncertainty. The worship of Inshushinak, the patron deity of Susa, continued throughout this period despite the destruction of major temple complexes and the disruption of traditional religious hierarchies. Archaeological excavations have uncovered numerous small shrines and votive deposits that demonstrate continued devotion to traditional Elamite deities, while inscriptions in Middle Elamite script indicate the preservation of religious texts and ceremonial knowledge. These religious continuities provided important sources of cultural identity and political legitimacy for local rulers who claimed authority based on traditional religious sanction rather than imperial appointment. Artistic traditions during this period reveal both continuity with earlier styles and adaptation to changed circumstances and reduced resources. Archaeological assemblages include ceramic vessels, bronze objects, and carved items that maintain distinctive Elamite decorative motifs, while incorporating influences from neighbouring cultures and adapting to local production capabilities. The persistence of these artistic traditions indicates the survival of skilled craftsmen and the continued demand for objects that expressed Elamite cultural identity, even under conditions of political fragmentation and economic hardship. The development of regional artistic styles during this period reflects the emergence of local cultural identities that differentiated various successor states while maintaining connections to broader Elamite traditions. Archaeological analysis reveals distinctive ceramic styles and decorative motifs that developed in different regions, suggesting conscious efforts to establish local cultural markers while preserving essential elements of Elamite artistic heritage. These regional variations contributed to the political fragmentation of the period while maintaining cultural continuities that would influence later developments in Elamite history. Linguistic developments during the period of fragmentation provide important evidence for cultural continuity despite political disruption. The continued use of Middle Elamite script in administrative documents and royal inscriptions indicates the survival of literate traditions and institutional knowledge even in areas experiencing severe political instability. Archaeological discoveries of inscribed objects from various regional centres reveal efforts to maintain traditional administrative procedures and legal frameworks, though often adapted to local conditions and reduce territorial scope. The preservation of Elamite linguistic traditions required the continued operation of scribal schools and educational institutions that transmitted literacy skills and cultural knowledge to new generations. Archaeological evidence from several sites reveals the operation of modest educational facilities that provided basic instruction in reading, writing, and administrative procedures, though on much smaller scales than the sophisticated institutions that had operated during the imperial period. These educational activities represent important investments in cultural preservation that enabled the survival of Elamite intellectual traditions through the period of political fragmentation, The gradual emergence of new political structures during the later phases of this period reflected both adaptation to changed circumstances and efforts to reconstruct effective governance mechanisms based on available resources and territorial realities. Archaeological evidence from the 9th and 8th centuries BC reveals the construction of new administrative centres and the establishment of regional kingdoms that combined elements of traditional Elamite political organisation with innovations adapted to local conditions and reduced territorial scope. These emerging political entities developed diplomatic relationships with neighbouring powers that reflected their reduced status, while maintaining claims to Elamite political heritage and cultural identity. Archaeological evidence reveals renewed construction activities and increased trade volumes during the later phases of this period, indicating gradual economic recovery and political stabilisation in some regions. However, the scale and sophistication of these developments remained far below the achievements of the imperial period, reflecting the fundamental transformation of Elamite civilization from a major regional power to a collection of smaller political entities struggling to maintain independence and cultural identity in an increasingly competitive international environment. The gradual stabilization of political conditions across former Elamite territories during the 8th century BC created opportunities for ambitious local rulers to attempt reconstruction of centralized authority, though on scales far more modest than the imperial achievements of their Shutrukid predecessors. Archaeological evidence from Susa reveals renewed construction activity beginning around 770 BC, including the restoration of damaged administrative buildings and the establishment of new residential quarters that housed a growing population of craftsmen, merchants, and government officials. These construction projects employed simplified architectural techniques compared to earlier periods, using predominantly mud brick rather than the fired brick that had characterized imperial monuments, yet they demonstrated sufficient resources and organizational capabilities to support substantial urban renewal efforts. The emergence of the Neo-Elamite kingdoms represented a fundamental reorganization of political authority that acknowledged the changed realities of reduced territorial control, while attempting to preserve essential elements of Elamite cultural and political identity. Rather than attempting to recreate the unified empire that had once stretched from the Persian Gulf to the central Iranian plateau, Neo-Elamite rulers focused on establishing effective control over core territories that could provide sufficient resources for maintaining royal courts, professional armies, and administrative apparatus capable of projecting power within more limited geographic boundaries. Susa's restoration as a major political centre required extensive infrastructure development and the re-establishment of administrative institutions that had been destroyed or abandoned during the preceding centuries of political fragmentation. Archaeological excavations reveal the construction of new palace complexes that incorporated traditional Elamite architectural elements while adapting to contemporary security requirements and available construction materials. These palaces featured multiple courtyards surrounded by reception halls, residential quarters, and administrative offices, though their overall scale remained substantially smaller than the massive royal complexes constructed during the height of imperial power. The reconstruction of Susa's administrative apparatus involved the recruitment of skilled personnel from across the region and the re-establishment of educational institutions capable of training new generations of scribes, accountants, and judicial officials. Archaeological evidence reveals the operation of scribal schools that taught Middle Elamite writing alongside Akkadian cuneiform, reflecting the practical requirements of governing populations with diverse linguistic backgrounds while maintaining connections to broader Mesopotamian commercial and diplomatic networks. These educational efforts represented substantial investments in institutional development that created the human resources necessary for effective governance and territorial expansion. Regional power centres established during the Neo-Elamite period reflected geographic and economic realities that had shaped Elamite political organisation throughout its history. Highland territories in Fars province remained under the control of local dynasties that had emerged during the period of fragmentation. Though many of these rulers acknowledged the suzerainty of Susa-based kings while maintaining substantial autonomy in internal affairs. Archaeological surveys reveal continued construction activity at sites like Malian, where local rulers invested in fortifications and administrative buildings that demonstrated their authority while providing facilities for tax collection and military recruitment. The balance between highland and lowland political interests created ongoing tensions within Neo-Elamite political structures, as rulers attempted to maintain unity while accommodating the distinct economic needs and cultural traditions of different regions. Highland communities depended heavily on pastoral activities and control of trade routes, connecting the Iranian plateau with lowland markets, while agricultural populations in the plains required coordinated irrigation management and protection from nomadic raiders. These different economic foundations created competing demands for royal attention and resource allocation that required sophisticated diplomatic skills and flexible administrative approaches. Tribal confederations played increasingly important roles in Neo-Elamite political organisation, as traditional administrative structures proved inadequate for governing populations that had developed greater autonomy during the period of political fragmentation. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of meeting halls and ceremonial centres designed to accommodate assemblies of tribal leaders and regional governors, indicating the development of more consultative governance mechanisms that balanced royal authority with local autonomy. These institutional innovations reflected practical adaptations to changed political circumstances while maintaining essential elements of centralized coordination necessary for military operations and large-scale construction projects. The integration of tribal groups into Neo-Elamite political structures involved complex negotiations that balanced traditional authority patterns with royal administrative requirements. Many tribal leaders retained control over their followers' military service and tax obligations, while acknowledging ultimate royal authority in matters of foreign policy and major judicial decisions. Archaeological evidence from tribal territories reveals the construction of fortified compounds that served as both defensive installations and administrative centres, where royal officials worked alongside traditional leaders to coordinate governance activities and maintain communication with central authorities. The military organisation developed during the Neo-Elamite period reflected both the reduced resources available to contemporary rulers and the changing strategic environment that emphasised defensive operations and limited territorial campaigns, rather than the massive imperial expansion attempts of earlier periods. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of new fortification systems that incorporated lessons learned from previous conflicts while adapting to contemporary siege techniques and weapons technology. These defensive installations featured multiple wall circuits with strategically placed towers and gates, underground water supplies, and storage facilities capable of supporting extended sieges. Weapons technology during the Neo-Elamite period incorporated ironworking techniques that had become standard throughout the ancient Near East, though Elamite smiths continued to produce bronze objects for ceremonial purposes and specialised applications. Archaeological assemblages include iron swords, spears, and arrowheads that demonstrate advanced metallurgical knowledge, while bronze vessels and ceremonial weapons maintain traditional Elamite decorative motifs and manufacturing techniques. The coexistence of these different metallurgical traditions indicates selective adoption of foreign technologies while preserving distinctive cultural practices and artistic traditions. The confrontation with the expanding Neo-Assyrian Empire represented the greatest external challenge faced by Neo-Elamite rulers, as Assyrian military forces employed advanced siege techniques and organisational capabilities that posed unprecedented threats to Elamite territorial integrity. Archaeological evidence from the border regions reveals extensive fortification efforts undertaken in response to Assyrian pressure, including the construction of defensive lines that attempted to channel enemy advances into prepared killing zones while protecting key transportation routes and agricultural areas from systematic destruction. Shutur-Nahunta, who ruled during the mid-7th century BC, emerged as one of the most significant Neo-Elamite leaders through his successful resistance to Assyrian expansion attempts and his efforts to restore Elamite control over territories that had been lost during the period of political fragmentation. Archaeological evidence from his reign reveals extensive military preparations, including the construction of new weapons workshops and the establishment of training facilities where Elamite forces practice coordinated tactics designed to exploit their knowledge of local terrain while avoiding direct confrontation with superior Assyrian heavy infantry formations. The military campaigns conducted under Shutur-Nahunta involved sophisticated intelligence gathering and diplomatic maneuvering that exploited internal conflicts within the Assyrian Empire, while building coalitions with other regional powers that shared concerns about Assyrian expansion. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of forward operating bases in contested territories, designed to provide staging areas for offensive operations while maintaining communication with main force concentrations and supply bases. These installations featured underground storage facilities and concealed communication tunnels that enabled defenders to coordinate resistance efforts while avoiding detection by Assyrian reconnaissance forces. Shutur-Nahunta's defensive strategies emphasized mobility and harassment tactics that exploited Elamite advantages in mountain warfare while avoiding the pitched battles where Assyrian organizational superiority and siege equipment provided decisive advantages. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites reveals the use of prepared positions that channeled enemy advances into ambush zones, while weapons caches hidden in mountain caves provided supplies for guerrilla operations that disrupted Assyrian supply lines and communication networks. These tactics required extensive preparation and local knowledge that demonstrated sophisticated military planning and effective coordination between regular forces and tribal auxiliaries. The diplomatic initiatives pursued during Shutur-Nahunta's reign involved complex negotiations with the Babylonian rulers who shared Elamite concerns about Assyrian expansion while maintaining their own territorial ambitions in regions claimed by both kingdoms. Archaeological evidence reveals the exchange of diplomatic gifts and the establishment of communication protocols that facilitated coordination between Elamite and Babylonian forces without creating formal alliance obligations that might have provoked premature Assyrian retaliation. These diplomatic efforts required sophisticated understanding of international politics and careful balance of competing interests that preserved Elamite autonomy while building practical cooperation against shared threats. The reign of Halutash and Shushanak during the late 7th century BC marked another significant phase of Neo-Elamite resistance to Assyrian pressure, as this ruler attempted to exploit internal Assyrian political difficulties while rebuilding Elamite military capabilities and territorial control. Archaeological evidence from his reign reveals continued fortification efforts and the establishment of new administrative centres in recovered territories, indicating sustained efforts to consolidate political authority while preparing for renewed military confrontations with Assyrian forces. Halutash and Shushanak's military organisation incorporated lessons learned from previous conflicts while adapting to changing strategic circumstances that required greater emphasis on defensive operations and coalition warfare. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of improved communication systems that connected defensive installations across extensive geographic areas, enabling coordinated responses to enemy movements while maintaining flexibility for tactical adaptations based on local conditions. These communication networks included signal towers positioned on prominent hilltops and relay stations that provided secure facilities for messengers travelling between different command centres. The administrative reforms implemented during Halutash and Shushanak's reign attempted to strengthen central authority while accommodating the autonomous tendencies that had developed among regional leaders during the period of political fragmentation. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of new, provincial administrative centres that combine traditional Elamite governance mechanisms with innovations adapted from contemporary Mesopotamian and Iranian political practices. These administrative installations featured standardized record-keeping systems and judicial procedures that maintained consistency across different regions while preserving local customs and traditional authority structures. The economic policies pursued during this period reflected both the resource constraints imposed by ongoing military pressures and opportunities created by renewed political stability in core Elamite territories. Archaeological evidence reveals efforts to restore traditional craft production and commercial activities that had declined during the period of political fragmentation, including the re-establishment of specialized workshops producing textiles, ceramics, and metalwork for both domestic consumption and export to foreign markets. These economic initiatives required substantial capital investment and the recruitment of skilled craftsmen from across the region, indicating successful resource mobilization despite ongoing military expenditures. Trade relationships developed during the Neo-Elamite period reflected both traditional commercial connections and new opportunities created by changing political circumstances in neighbouring regions. Archaeological evidence reveals renewed commercial contact with communities across the Iranian plateau and the re-establishment of trading relationships with Mesopotamian cities that had been disrupted during the period of Assyrian expansion. These commercial activities generated customs revenues and provided access to foreign goods and raw materials that supported both royal courts and urban populations, while demonstrating Elamite recovery from the economic disruptions of the preceding centuries. Cultural and religious developments during the Neo-Elamite period demonstrated remarkable continuity with earlier traditions, while incorporating innovations that reflected contemporary political circumstances and cultural influences from neighbouring civilizations. The continued worship of Inshushinak remained central to Elamite religious practice, though archaeological evidence reveals the integration of new deities and ceremonial practices that reflected expanded cultural contacts and the practical requirements of governing diverse populations with different religious traditions. Temple reconstruction efforts during this period involved substantial resource investments that demonstrated both royal commitment to traditional religious practices and the economic recovery that enabled major construction projects. Archaeological excavations at Susa reveal the restoration of damaged temple complexes and the construction of new religious facilities that incorporated traditional Elamite architectural elements while adapting to contemporary construction techniques and available materials. These religious buildings featured elaborate decorative programs that maintained distinctive Elamite artistic traditions while incorporating influences from Mesopotamian and Iranian cultural sources. The development of new ceremonial practices during the Neo-Elamite period reflected both continuity with traditional religious observances and adaptation to changed political circumstances that required different approaches to royal legitimacy and social cohesion. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of new ceremonial spaces designed to accommodate larger assemblies and more complex ritual activities, indicating the evolution of religious practices that served both spiritual and political functions in maintaining social stability and royal authority. Religious festivals and ceremonies provided important opportunities for displaying royal power and reinforcing political relationships between central authorities and regional leaders, while maintaining cultural traditions that preserved Elamite identity despite ongoing political pressures from expanding foreign empires. Archaeological evidence reveals the production of elaborate ceremonial objects and the maintenance of specialized religious personnel who preserved traditional knowledge while adapting practices to contemporary requirements and available resources. The artistic achievements of the Neo-Elamite period demonstrated both continuity with earlier traditions and innovation in response to changing cultural influences and technical capabilities. Archaeological assemblages include ceramic vessels, bronze objects, and carved items that maintain distinctive Elamite decorative motifs, while incorporating new techniques and stylistic elements derived from contact with neighbouring civilizations. These artistic developments indicate the survival of skilled craftsmen and the continued demand for objects that expressed Elamite cultural identity while adapting to contemporary aesthetic preferences and technical possibilities. Architectural developments during this period reflected both practical requirements for defensive installations and ceremonial buildings, and the symbolic importance of construction projects that demonstrated royal power and cultural continuity. Archaeological evidence reveals the use of traditional Elamite building techniques alongside innovations adapted from Mesopotamian and Iranian architectural traditions, creating distinctive styles that maintained cultural identity while incorporating useful technical improvements and decorative elements. The escalating confrontation between Elam and the expanding Neo-Assyrian Empire during the mid-8th century BC represented the final chapter in the long history of independent Elamite political power, as successive Assyrian monarchs pursued increasingly aggressive policies designed to eliminate the persistent threat posed by Elamite interference in Mesopotamian affairs. The military innovations introduced by Tiglath-Pileser III around 745 BC fundamentally transformed Assyrian warfare capabilities, creating professional armies equipped with iron weapons, advanced siege equipment, and organizational structures that enabled sustained campaigns across vast distances. Archaeological evidence from Assyrian military installations reveals systematic preparations for extended operations against Elamite territories, including the construction of supply depots, weapons workshops, and training facilities that supported the logistical requirements of large-scale warfare in mountainous terrain. Tiglath-Pileser III's military reforms established standardized equipment and training procedures that transformed Assyrian forces from seasonal militia units into professional soldiers capable of conducting complex operations throughout the year. Archaeological excavations at Assyrian military sites reveal evidence of specialized workshops producing standardized weapons, armor, and siege equipment according to precise specifications that ensured consistent performance across different army units. These facilities employed division of labor principles that increased production efficiency while maintaining quality standards, creating the material foundation for sustained military pressure against multiple enemies simultaneously. The Assyrian military machine that emerged from these reforms incorporated technological advantages that provided decisive superiority over traditional Near Eastern armies, including Elamite forces that continue to rely on organizational structures and equipment types developed during earlier periods. Iron weapons offered significant advantages in durability and sharpness over bronze alternatives, while improved armor designs provided better protection without sacrificing mobility requirements. Archaeological analysis of weapons assemblages from this period reveals systematic adoption of new metallurgical techniques that produce superior alloys and more effective weapon designs across all categories of military equipment. Assyrian siege warfare capabilities represented perhaps the most significant technological advancement that influenced the outcome of conflicts with Elamite forces, as traditional fortification systems proved inadequate against battering rams, siege towers, and undermining techniques employed by Assyrian engineers. Archaeological evidence from siege sites reveals the use of sophisticated mechanical devices that concentrated tremendous force against specific points in defensive walls, while coordinated assault tactics enabled attackers to exploit breaches before defenders could organize effective counterattacks. These siege techniques required extensive training and specialized equipment that few contemporary armies possessed, providing Assyrian forces with overwhelming advantages in attacks against fortified positions. The strategic implications of Assyrian military superiority became apparent through their systematic conquest of territories that had previously remained beyond the reach of Mesopotamian armies, as improved logistics and organizational capabilities enabled sustained operations in regions where earlier campaigns had failed due to supply difficulties and communication problems. Archaeological surveys along major campaign routes reveal evidence of supply bases and communication stations that supported extended military operations, while road construction projects improved transportation capabilities and reduced travel times between different theatres of operation. Elamite responses to Assyrian military pressure initially focused on defensive strategies that exploited geographic advantages while avoiding direct confrontation with superior enemy forces in open terrain. Archaeological evidence from Elamite fortification sites reveals extensive construction efforts designed to strengthen existing defensive positions and create new strongholds capable of withstanding Assyrian siege techniques. These fortifications incorporated multiple defensive lines with strategically positioned obstacles and killing zones that channeled enemy advances into prepared positions, where defenders could maximize their effectiveness despite numerical disadvantages. The construction of defensive installations across Elamite territory required substantial resource investments and coordinated planning that demonstrated effective central authority despite ongoing political pressures. Archaeological excavations reveal sophisticated engineering techniques employed in fortification construction, including underground water supplies, concealed storage facilities, and communication tunnels that enable defenders to maintain resistance during extended sieges. These defensive preparations indicate systematic military planning and substantial commitment of human and material resources to territorial defense efforts. Elamite military tactics during this period emphasized mobility and harassment operations that exploited their superior knowledge of local terrain while avoiding the pitched battles where Assyrian organizational advantages provided decisive superiority. Archaeological evidence from the battlefield sites reveals the use of prepared positions that channeled enemy movements into ambush zones, while weapons caches distributed throughout mountainous regions supported guerrilla operations that disrupted Assyrian supply lines and communication networks. These tactics required extensive coordination between regular military units and tribal auxiliaries who provided local knowledge and specialized skills in mountain warfare. The diplomatic dimensions of Elamite resistance involved complex negotiations with Babylonian rulers who shared concerns about Assyrian expansion while maintaining their own territorial ambitions in regions claimed by both kingdoms. Archaeological evidence reveals exchanges of diplomatic gifts and the establishment of communication protocols that facilitated military coordination without creating formal alliance obligations that might have provoked premature Assyrian retaliation. These diplomatic efforts required sophisticated understanding of international politics and careful management of competing interests that preserved Elamite autonomy while building practical cooperation against shared threats. Babylonian rebellions against Assyrian rule provided crucial opportunities for Elamite intervention in Mesopotamian affairs, as local populations sought external support for resistance efforts, while Elamite rulers attempted to exploit Assyrian difficulties to recover territories lost during earlier conflicts. Archaeological evidence from border regions reveals the construction of forward operating bases that provided staging areas for Elamite military operations in support of Babylonian rebels, while diplomatic correspondence preserved in various archives documents the complex negotiations required to coordinate military activities between different resistance groups. The reign of Shutruk-Nahunta during the Neo-Elamite period marked a significant escalation in anti-Assyrian activities, as this ruler pursued aggressive policies designed to exploit internal Assyrian political difficulties while rebuilding Elamite military capabilities and territorial control. Archaeological evidence from his reign reveals extensive military preparations, including the construction of new weapons workshops and the establishment of training facilities where Elamite forces practiced coordinated tactics adapted to contemporary warfare requirements. These preparations indicate systematic planning for major military operations and substantial investment in military infrastructure despite ongoing resource constraints. Shutruk-Nahunta's support for Babylonian rebellions involved direct military intervention that brought Elamite forces into prolonged conflict with Assyrian armies, creating opportunities to test new tactical approaches while gaining practical experience in warfare against contemporary military techniques. Archaeological evidence from campaign sites reveals the deployment of combined arms formations that integrated infantry, cavalry, and siege equipment in coordinated operations designed to maximize Elamite advantages while minimizing exposure to Assyrian strengths. These tactical innovations demonstrated adaptive military thinking and effective utilization of available resources despite technological disadvantages. The military campaigns conducted during this period required sophisticated logistical planning and resource management that enabled Elamite forces to maintain extended operations in foreign territories while preserving communication with homeland bases. Archaeological surveys have identified supply routes and staging areas that supported Elamite military operations, including hidden depots that provided weapons, food, and equipment for forces operating behind enemy lines. These logistical capabilities represented significant organizational achievements that enabled sustained military pressure despite the geographic challenges of conducting operations across extensive distances in hostile territory. Sargon II's accession to the Assyrian throne around 722 BC brought renewed military pressure against Elamite territories, as this energetic ruler pursued systematic campaigns designed to eliminate Elamite influence in Mesopotamian affairs while extending Assyrian control over strategic trade routes and resource-rich regions. Archaeological evidence from Sargon's reign reveals massive military preparations that surpassed even the extensive efforts of his predecessors, including the construction of new military installations and the development of improved siege equipment specifically designed for operations in mountainous terrain. The Assyrian campaigns launched during Sargon II's reign employed new tactical approaches that combined traditional siege warfare with mobile operations designed to exploit weaknesses in Elamite defensive strategies. Archaeological evidence from campaign sites reveals the use of coordinated attacks that simultaneously threatened multiple defensive positions, preventing effective concentration of Elamite forces while maintaining pressure across broad fronts. These tactical innovations required sophisticated command and control systems that enabled coordination among widely dispersed military units operating in difficult terrain conditions. Elamite resistance to Sargonian military pressure involved both defensive operations designed to protect core territories and offensive campaigns aimed at disrupting Assyrian consolidation efforts in newly conquered regions. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of new fortification systems that incorporated lessons learned from the previous conflicts, including improved designs that provided better protection against contemporary siege techniques while maintaining the communication and supply capabilities necessary for sustained resistance. These defensive preparations represented substantial resource investments that demonstrated continued Elamite commitment to territorial independence, despite mounting military pressures. The death of Sargon II in 705 BC created temporary opportunities for Elamite recovery, as succession disputes within the Assyrian Empire reduced military pressure and enabled Elamite rulers to consolidate their positions while rebuilding damaged military capabilities. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals renewed construction activity and efforts to restore administrative systems that had been disrupted by prolonged warfare, indicating effective exploitation of Assyrian political difficulties to strengthen Elamite defensive capabilities and territorial control. Sennacherib's consolidation of Assyrian power brought renewed and intensified military pressure against Elamite territories, as this ruler pursued even more aggressive policies designed to achieve final resolution of the persistent Elamite threat to Assyrian interests in Mesopotamia. Archaeological evidence from Sennacherib's reign reveals unprecedented military preparations that incorporated technological innovations and organizational improvements designed specifically for operations against Elamite defensive systems and tactical approaches. The military confrontations during Sennacherib's reign involved increasingly sophisticated warfare techniques, as both sides adapted their strategies and equipment to counter enemy innovations and exploit perceived weaknesses. Archaeological evidence from battlefield sites reveals the deployment of new weapon systems and tactical formations that reflected ongoing military evolution and competitive adaptation between opposing forces. These developments indicate high levels of military professionalism and systematic analysis of combat effectiveness that drove continuous innovation in weapons, tactics, and organizational structures. Elamite involvement in the Great Babylonian Rebellion led by Merodach Baladan represented the most significant challenge to Assyrian authority during this period, as coordinated resistance efforts threatened to undermine Assyrian control over crucial Mesopotamian territories while demonstrating the potential effectiveness of anti-Assyrian coalitions. Archaeological evidence reveals extensive Elamite military support for Babylonian rebels, including the deployment of regular army units and the provision of weapons and supplies that enabled sustained resistance against Assyrian counterattack efforts. The failure of the Babylonian rebellion, despite substantial Elamite support, demonstrated the overwhelming military superiority that Assyrian forces had achieved through decades of military innovation and organizational development. Archaeological evidence from the aftermath of the rebellion reveals systematic Assyrian destruction of resistance infrastructure and the implementation of harsh punitive measures designed to prevent future rebellions while eliminating the material foundations for continued resistance efforts. Esarhaddon's reign marked a continuation of aggressive Assyrian policies toward Elam, though his campaigns focused more on consolidating territorial gains and eliminating remaining centers of resistance rather than major territorial expansion. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals continued military pressure against Elamite positions, combined with diplomatic efforts designed to isolate Elamite rulers from potential allies while encouraging internal political divisions that might weaken unified resistance efforts. The accession of Ashurbanipal around 668 BC brought the most systematic and devastating military campaign against Elam in the entire history of Assyrian Elamite conflicts, as this ruler pursued policies designed to achieve complete elimination of Elamite political independence and cultural identity. Archaeological evidence from Ashurbanipal's reign reveals unprecedented military preparations that incorporated all previous tactical and technological innovations, while adding new elements specifically designed to overcome Elamite defensive advantages and achieve decisive victory in a mountainous terrain. Ashurbanipal's first major campaign against Elam around 653 BC employed coordinated attacks along multiple routes that prevented effective Elamite defensive concentration, while maintaining pressure across the entire frontier. Archaeological evidence from this campaign reveals the systematic destruction of Elamite fortifications and administrative centres, indicating deliberate efforts to eliminate the infrastructure necessary for continued political organisation and military resistance. These destruction patterns demonstrate comprehensive strategic planning designed to achieve permanent elimination of Elamite political capabilities rather than temporary military victories. The siege and capture of Susa during Ashurbanipal's campaigns represented the culmination of decades of Assyrian military pressure and the final collapse of organised Elamite resistance to foreign domination. Archaeological excavations reveal extensive destruction layers that provide stark evidence of the violence accompanying the city's fall, with burned buildings, scattered weapons, and hastily buried treasure hoards indicating desperate defensive efforts and systematic enemy destruction of urban infrastructure. The systematic looting of Susa following its capture involved more than simple material gain, as Assyrian forces deliberately targeted the symbols and repositories of Elamite cultural identity and historical memory. Archaeological evidence reveals the removal of royal statues, religious objects, and administrative archives that contain the institutional knowledge necessary for maintaining Elamite political and cultural traditions. This cultural destruction represented a deliberate attempt to eliminate the foundations of Elamite identity and prevent future efforts to restore political independence. Ashurbanipal's campaigns extended beyond military conquest to encompass systematic destruction of Elamite religious centres and the deportation of skilled craftsmen, religious personnel, and administrative officials who possessed the knowledge necessary for maintaining traditional institutions and cultural practices. Archaeological evidence from religious sites reveals deliberate destruction of temple complexes and the removal of cult objects that served as focal points for religious observances and cultural identity. These actions indicate sophisticated understanding of the cultural foundations of political resistance and systematic efforts to eliminate the institutional basis for future Elamite political organisation. The dispersal of Elamite populations across the Iranian plateau following Ashurbanipal's victories represented the final stage in the elimination of Elamite political independence, as traditional social structures and territorial relationships were systematically disrupted through forced relocations and administrative reorganisation. Archaeological evidence reveals the abandonment of major urban centres and the establishment of new settlement patterns that reflected Assyrian administrative requirements rather than traditional Elamite social and economic organisation. The deportation policies implemented during this period involved the systematic removal of skilled personnel and community leaders who might have provided focal points for resistance efforts or attempts to restore traditional political structures. Archaeological evidence reveals the dispersal of craft specialists and religious personnel across distant regions, breaking the concentration of knowledge and expertise that had supported Elamite cultural achievements while preventing the emergence of new centres of political organisation. The final collapse of independent Elamite political power around 646 BC marked the end of nearly 3 millennia of continuous political development and cultural achievement, as the last remnants of organised resistance were eliminated through systematic military campaigns and administrative policies designed to prevent future revival of Elamite political aspirations. Archaeological evidence from this period reveals the complete transformation of traditional settlement patterns and the abandonment of institutions that had maintained Elamite cultural identity and political organisation for generations. The destruction of Elamite political independence created a power vacuum in southwestern Iran that would eventually be filled by new political formations, though none would achieve the cultural sophistication or territorial extent that had characterized Elamite civilization at its height. Archaeological evidence reveals the gradual emergence of new settlement patterns and political structures that incorporated some elements of Elamite tradition while adapting to changed circumstances and the requirements of foreign political control. The emergence of Cyrus the Great as the dominant power in southwestern Iran around 550 BC fundamentally transformed the political landscape that had witnessed the destruction of independent Elamite kingdoms barely a century earlier, unlike the devastating Assyrian campaigns that had sought to eliminate Elamite political identity through systematic destruction and population dispersal. Cyrus pursued policies of cultural accommodation and administrative integration that preserved many traditional Elamite institutions while incorporating them into the expanding Persian Empire. Archaeological evidence from Susa reveals immediate changes in material culture following the Persian conquest, including the introduction of new architectural styles, ceramic traditions, and administrative practices that reflected the cosmopolitan character of Achaemenid imperial administration. The Persian conquest of Elam occurred not through a single decisive campaign, but rather through a series of negotiations and limited military operations that exploited the political fragmentation that had characterized the region since the Assyrian destructions. Local rulers who had maintained precarious independence in highland valleys and lowland enclaves found themselves unable to resist the systematic expansion of Persian authority, yet Cyrus demonstrated remarkable diplomatic skill in transforming potential enemies into willing collaborators through generous terms and respect for traditional authority structures. Archaeological surveys across former Elamite territories reveal minimal destruction levels associated with the Persian takeover, indicating that most transitions occurred through negotiated settlements rather than violent conquest. Cyrus's administrative policies toward conquered Elamite territories reflected sophisticated understanding of the practical requirements for governing populations with distinct cultural traditions and established political expectations. Rather than imposing uniform Persian administrative structures, the early Achaemenid rulers adopted flexible approaches that preserved local institutions while ensuring ultimate Persian authority through carefully placed officials and strategic military garrisons. Archaeological excavations at administrative centres reveal the construction of new government buildings that combined Persian architectural elements with traditional Elamite design features, creating distinctive hybrid styles that symbolize the integration of different cultural traditions within the imperial framework. The establishment of the satrapy of Susa represented a crucial innovation in Achaemenid administrative practice, as this territorial unit encompassed the core regions of former Elamite political authority while acknowledging their distinct cultural identity and administrative requirements. The satrap appointed to govern Susa exercised authority over territories that extended from the Zagros foothills to the Persian Gulf, encompassing the fertile agricultural plains that had supported Elamite civilization for millennia, alongside the highland regions that controlled access to mineral resources and trade routes connecting the Iranian plateau with Mesopotamian markets. Archaeological evidence reveals that the early satraps of Susa are often drawn from Persian noble families with connections to the royal court, yet they relied heavily on Elamite administrative personnel who possessed essential knowledge of local conditions, legal traditions, and economic systems. Administrative archives from this period show the continued use of Middle Elamite script alongside Old Persian and Aramaic for official documents, indicating practical recognition of linguistic diversity and the importance of maintaining communication with populations that retained their traditional languages and cultural practices. The integration of Elamite administrative traditions into Achaemenid imperial practice created important precedents for governing other conquered territories with established political institutions and cultural identities. The Persian approach of preserving useful local practices while ensuring imperial control through strategic oversight became a hallmark of Achaemenid administration that enabled the empire to govern diverse populations across vast geographic areas without the massive military commitments that would have been required for direct rule through imposed administrative structures. Susa's transformation into one of the Persian Empire's primary capitals represented perhaps the most dramatic change in the city's long history, as it evolved from a regional administrative centre into a cosmopolitan imperial metropolis that attracted populations from across the known world. Archaeological excavations reveal extensive construction projects initiated during the reign of Darius I, including massive palace complexes that rivaled the royal residences at Persepolis and Ecbatana in their architectural magnificence and symbolic importance. These construction projects employed craftsmen and materials from across the empire, creating architectural programs that combined Persian imperial themes with local Elamite traditions and influences from Mesopotamian, Egyptian and Greek artistic sources. The Great Palace complex constructed at Susa during the early Achaemenid period encompassed an area of approximately 15 hectares, featuring multiple courtyards surrounded by reception halls, residential quarters, administrative offices, and ceremonial spaces that accommodated the complex requirements of imperial administration and royal ceremonial activities. archaeological analysis reveals sophisticated construction techniques that incorporated lessons learned from earlier Persian building projects while adapting to local environmental conditions and available materials. The palace foundations employed massive stone blocks transported from distant quarries, while the superstructure utilised fired brick and timber construction that provided both durability and aesthetic appeal. The decorative programs implemented in the Susa Palace complex demonstrate the cosmopolitan character of Achaemenid imperial culture and the deliberate integration of artistic traditions from across the empire. Archaeological discoveries include glazed brick reliefs depicting Persian royal guards, Elamite tribute bearers, and various subject peoples in their distinctive costumes and carrying characteristic products of their homelands. These artistic representations served both decorative and political functions, creating visually impressive displays of imperial power while acknowledging the cultural diversity that characterized the Achaemenid Empire and the contributions of different peoples to imperial prosperity and strength. The technical sophistication of the glazed brick production at Susa required advanced ceramic knowledge and specialized workshop facilities that employed craftsmen trained in techniques developed across the ancient Near East. Archaeological analysis reveals the use of complex firing procedures that achieve consistent colors and surface qualities across thousands of individual bricks. While the assembly of these elements into coherent artistic programs required careful planning and precise execution that demonstrated remarkable organizational capabilities and artistic vision. The administrative functions housed within the Susa Palace complex included archives that preserved records of imperial administration, tribute collection, and diplomatic correspondence that provide crucial insights into Achaemenid governmental practices and the role of former Elamite territories within the broader imperial system. Archaeological discoveries of cuneiform tablets written in Elamite, Old Persian, and Aramaic reveal the multilingual character of imperial administration and the practical importance of maintaining communication capabilities in different languages to serve the needs of diverse populations and administrative requirements. The preservation of Elamite language in official imperial contexts represented a significant departure from earlier imperial practices that had typically imposed the conqueror's language and administrative procedures on subject populations. The continued use of Middle Elamite script in royal inscriptions and administrative documents indicates not merely practical accommodation to local conditions, but active recognition of Elamite cultural contributions to imperial administration, and the value of preserving institutional knowledge and practices that had proven effective over centuries of political development. Royal inscriptions commissioned during the Achaemenid period often appeared in trilingual versions that included Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian Akkadian, reflecting the multicultural character of the empire and the practical requirements for communicating imperial policies to diverse populations with different linguistic traditions. The Elamite versions of these inscriptions employed traditional formulaic language and religious references that maintained continuity with earlier Elamite royal traditions, while adapting to new political circumstances and imperial ideological requirements. The Behistun inscription, carved on a cliff face in western Iran during the reign of Darius I, provides perhaps the most famous example of trilingual royal propaganda that employed Elamite alongside Old Persian and Babylonian to communicate imperial authority and political legitimacy to different audience groups. The Elamite version of this inscription demonstrates sophisticated literary skills and cultural knowledge that required the services of trained scribes who maintained traditional educational practices and intellectual traditions despite the fundamental political changes that had transformed their society. Archaeological evidence reveals the continued operation of educational institutions that taught Elamite language and administrative procedures alongside training in Persian and Aramaic languages that had become essential for advancement in imperial service. These schools produced the bilingual and trilingual administrative personnel, who staffed the complex bureaucratic apparatus that governed the satrapy of Susiana, while maintaining communication with central imperial authorities and local populations who retained their traditional languages and cultural practices. The ceremonial role of Susa within the Achaemenid imperial system extended beyond its administrative functions to encompass important symbolic and religious activities that reinforced imperial unity while acknowledging regional diversity and cultural traditions. Archaeological evidence reveals the construction of ceremonial spaces designed to accommodate large assemblies of imperial officials, foreign ambassadors, and regional representatives who gathered for important state occasions and religious festivals that demonstrated imperial power while providing opportunities for diplomatic communication and cultural exchange. The Nowruz celebrations held at Susa each spring brought together representatives from across the empire who participated in elaborate ceremonies that combined Persian royal traditions with local customs and religious observances derived from various cultural sources. Archaeological discoveries include ceremonial objects and architectural features designed specifically for these celebrations, including raised platforms for royal appearances, specialized storage facilities for ceremonial equipment, and residential quarters for visiting dignitaries who remained at court for extended periods during major festivals. The integration of Elamite religious traditions into Achaemenid imperial practice created syncretic ceremonial forms that preserved essential elements of traditional Elamite worship while adapting to Persian royal ideology and Zoroastrian religious influences. Archaeological evidence from temple sites reveals the continued worship of traditional Elamite deities alongside Persian religious practices, with some temples serving dual functions that accommodated both traditional local worship and imperial ceremonial requirements. The worship of Ahura Mazda, the supreme deity of Persian Zoroastrianism, was promoted throughout the satrapy of Susiana through the construction of fire temples and the establishment of priestly hierarchies that maintained Zoroastrian religious practices while accommodating local religious traditions and customs. Archaeological excavations have uncovered fire altars and ceremonial installations that demonstrate the systematic promotion of Persian religious practices without the complete suppression of traditional Elamite religious observances that continued in modified forms throughout the Achaemenid period. Cultural synthesis during the Achaemenid period produced distinctive artistic styles and intellectual traditions that combined Elamite, Persian, and Mesopotamian elements in innovative ways that reflected the cosmopolitan character of imperial society. Archaeological assemblages from this period include ceramic vessels, metalwork, and carved objects that demonstrate sophisticated artistic fusion and technical innovation that drew upon multiple cultural sources while creating new forms adapted to contemporary aesthetic preferences and functional requirements. The development of new textile traditions during the Achaemenid period incorporated weaving techniques and decorative motifs from across the empire, while maintaining distinctive regional characteristics that preserved elements of traditional Elamite artistic identity. Archaeological discoveries include textile fragments and weaving equipment that demonstrate advanced production techniques and access to high-quality raw materials from distant sources, indicating the operation of extensive trade networks that connected Susiana with markets and production centres across the known world. Metalworking during the Achaemenid period achieved new levels of sophistication through the combination of traditional Elamite techniques with Persian innovations and access to improved raw materials and production technologies. Archaeological analysis reveals the production of elaborate vessels, weapons, and ceremonial objects that employed complex alloy compositions and sophisticated manufacturing processes that created objects of exceptional quality and artistic merit. These metalworking achievements required specialized knowledge and advanced workshop facilities that had employed craftsmen trained in techniques derived from multiple cultural traditions. The architectural innovations developed during the Achaemenid period at Susa influenced construction projects throughout the empire and established new standards for royal palace design and urban planning. The integration of Persian imperial architectural themes with traditional Elamite building techniques created distinctive styles that were adapted for use in other imperial capitals and administrative centres, demonstrating the important contributions of Elamite architectural knowledge to broader imperial cultural development. Economic integration within the Achaemenid imperial system provided new opportunities for Elamite agricultural and craft production, while creating challenges that required adaptation to imperial taxation systems and commercial regulations. Archaeological evidence reveals increased agricultural productivity through improved irrigation systems and the introduction of new crops and farming techniques that enhance the economic value of traditional Elamite agricultural regions while supporting larger urban populations and more extensive craft production activities. The tribute obligations imposed on the satrapy of Susa required systematic assessment of agricultural production, craft output, and commercial activities that generated detailed records of economic conditions and resource availability. Archaeological discoveries of administrative archives reveal sophisticated accounting procedures and taxation systems that balanced imperial revenue requirements with local economic capabilities and traditional production patterns that had sustained Elamite society for centuries. Trade relationships during the Achaemenid period connected Susa with commercial networks that extended across the entire known world, providing access to luxury goods, raw materials, and manufactured products that had been unavailable during earlier periods of political isolation and military conflict. Archaeological evidence reveals the importation of goods from India, Central Asia, Egypt, and the Mediterranean world, while Elamite products found markets across the empire and contributed to the economic prosperity that characterized the Achaemenid period. The development of improved transportation infrastructure during the Achaemenid period facilitated both administrative communication and commercial activities that integrated former Elamite territories more effectively into imperial economic systems. The construction of royal roads with standardized way stations and communication facilities reduced travel times and improved security for merchants and official travelers, while canal construction projects enhanced agricultural productivity and provided improved transportation routes for bulk commodities. Legal and judicial systems during the Achaemenid period combined Persian imperial law with traditional Elamite legal practices and Mesopotamian legal precedents to create comprehensive frameworks for resolving disputes and maintaining social order across culturally diverse populations. Archaeological discoveries of legal documents reveal the continued use of traditional Elamite legal terminology and procedures alongside Persian and Aramaic legal practices, indicating sophisticated legal pluralism that accommodated different cultural expectations while maintaining imperial authority and consistency in major legal matters. The preservation of traditional Elamite legal practices within the imperial system required the training of judicial personnel who understood both local customs and imperial legal requirements, creating a professional class of legal specialists who served as cultural intermediaries between different legal traditions and administrative systems. Archaeological evidence reveals the operation of legal training institutions that produced bilingual and multilingual legal professionals who staffed courts and administrative tribunals throughout the satrapy while maintaining communication with central imperial legal authorities. Military organization during the Achaemenid period incorporated Elamite military units into imperial armies while preserving traditional military practices and organizational structures that had proven effective in local conditions. Archaeological evidence reveals the continued production of traditional Elamite weapons and military equipment alongside Persian military innovations, indicating selective adaptation that preserved useful local practices while ensuring compatibility with imperial military standards and tactical requirements. The recruitment of Elamite military personnel for service in imperial armies provided opportunities for advancement and cultural exchange, while contributing to imperial military capabilities through specialized knowledge and skills adapted to different geographic and tactical conditions. Archaeological discoveries include military equipment and installations that demonstrate the integration of Elamite military traditions into broader imperial military practices while preserving distinctive regional characteristics and specialized capabilities. Population movements during the Achaemenid period brought settlers from across the empire to former Elamite territories while providing opportunities for Elamite populations to relocate to other regions and participate in imperial colonization projects and administrative activities. Archaeological evidence reveals the establishment of new settlements that combined populations from different cultural backgrounds while maintaining some degree of cultural distinctiveness and traditional practices that preserved elements of regional identity within the broader imperial system. The dissolution of the Achaemenid Empire following Alexander the Great's conquest in 331 BC marked the end of Elam's last period of political prominence, yet the cultural and administrative traditions developed over 3 millennia of Elamite civilization continue to influence the successive empires that controlled southwestern Iran. The Parthians, who established their dominance over the Iranian plateau around 247 BC, inherited administrative systems and cultural practices that bore unmistakable traces of Elamite institutional knowledge, particularly in their approach to governing diverse populations and managing complex irrigation systems that remained essential for agricultural productivity in the Khuzestan plains. Parthian administrative documents discovered at Nisa and other sites reveal the continuation of bureaucratic practices that can be traced directly to Elamite precedents, including standardized record-keeping procedures, taxation systems adapted to local agricultural cycles, and judicial frameworks that accommodated different legal traditions within a unified imperial structure. The Parthian approach to provincial administration, which balanced central authority with local autonomy through appointed governors who worked closely with traditional leaders, closely resembled the flexible governance strategies that had enabled Elamite rulers to maintain control over geographically diverse territories for centuries. Archaeological evidence from Parthian period sites in former Elamite territories reveals the persistence of distinctive architectural traditions that combined Hellenistic influences with building techniques and decorative motifs derived from Elamite sources. The characteristic use of glazed brick in decorative facades, the employment of specific proportional relationships in palace and temple construction, and the integration of ceremonial spaces designed for large public gatherings all demonstrate continuities with earlier Elamite architectural practices that had been preserved and transmitted through successive periods of foreign rule. The Sasanian dynasty, which displaced Parthian authority around 224 AD, demonstrated even more explicit connections to Elamite cultural heritage through their systematic revival of ancient Iranian traditions and their particular attention to the symbolic importance of Ctesiphon and other sites in Mesopotamia and southwestern Iran. Sasanian royal inscriptions frequently referenced the glorious achievements of ancient Iranian kingdoms, including specific mentions of Elamite rulers and their contributions to the development of Iranian imperial traditions that the Sasanians claim to represent and continue. Sasanian administrative practices incorporated numerous elements that can be traced to Elamite institutional innovations, particularly in their sophisticated systems for managing agricultural production and coordinating large-scale construction projects that required the mobilization of diverse skilled craftsmen and substantial material resources. The Sasanian approach to religious tolerance and cultural accommodation, which enabled them to govern populations with different ethnic backgrounds and religious traditions, reflected administrative philosophies that had been developed and refined during centuries of Elamite political experience. The preservation of Elamite cultural elements within Sasanian civilization extended beyond administrative practices to encompass artistic traditions, religious concepts, and intellectual frameworks that continue to influence Iranian cultural development long after the disappearance of independent Elamite political authority. Archaeological analysis of Sasanian metalwork, textile production, and ceramic traditions reveals the persistence of decorative motifs, manufacturing techniques, and aesthetic principles that originated in Elamite workshops and had been transmitted through generations of craftsmen who maintained traditional knowledge, despite changing political circumstances. The survival of Elamite linguistic elements within later Persian dialects spoken in southwestern Iran provides additional evidence for cultural continuity that transcended political transformations and foreign conquests. Modern linguistic analysis has identified numerous words in contemporary Persian and regional dialects that derive from Elamite sources, particularly terms related to agricultural practices, irrigation technology, and local geographic features that reflect the deep historical connections between language and landscape in regions that had been continuously inhabited for thousands of years. The rediscovery of Elamite civilization by European scholars during the 19th century occurred through a combination of archaeological exploration, linguistic analysis, and historical research that gradually revealed the extent and sophistication of this long-forgotten ancient society. The initial identification of Elamite sites resulted from the systematic exploration of Mesopotamian archaeological remains, as scholars investigating Babylonian and Assyrian civilizations encountered references to Elamite kingdoms and began searching for physical evidence of their existence and achievements. The pioneering excavations conducted at Susa by French archaeological missions, beginning in the 1880s, represented the first systematic attempt to uncover the material remains of Elamite civilization and understand its historical development through scientific archaeological methods. Marcel Dieulafoy and his successors employed stratigraphic excavation techniques that enabled them to identify different periods of occupation and reconstruct the chronological sequence of cultural and political developments that had shaped the site over more than 4 millennia of continuous habitation. The discovery of the Code of Hammurabi Stele at Susa in 1901 provided dramatic confirmation of the historical accounts that described Elamite military campaigns against Babylonian territories, while simultaneously demonstrating the sophisticated cultural achievements of Elamite civilization through the preservation and display of this important Mesopotamian monument. The presence of this famous legal document at Susa, along with numerous other Mesopotamian artifacts that had been transported there as war trophies, revealed the extent of Elamite military success and their appreciation for cultural achievements that transcended political boundaries. Archaeological investigations at Çoghazanbil, the ceremonial complex constructed by Untash-Napirisha during the 13th century BC, provided spectacular evidence of Elamite architectural and engineering capabilities that had been previously unknown to modern scholarship. The massive ziggurat and surrounding temple complexes demonstrated levels of planning, construction skill, and artistic sophistication that established Elamite civilization as one of the major cultural achievements of the ancient Near East, worthy of comparison with the most celebrated monuments of Mesopotamian and Egyptian civilizations. The systematic excavation of Elamite sites throughout the 20th century employed increasingly sophisticated archaeological techniques that enabled researchers to reconstruct detailed pictures of Elamite social organization, economic systems, and cultural practices. The application of scientific dating methods, environmental analysis, and comparative studies with contemporary civilizations provided new insights into the development of Elamite society and its interactions with neighbouring cultures over extended periods of historical change. Modern archaeological investigations have revealed the complexity of Elamite settlement patterns and territorial organisation through extensive surveys that have identified hundreds of sites associated with different periods of Elamite political development. These surveys have demonstrated that Elamite civilization encompassed not merely the major urban centres like Susa and Anshan, but extensive networks of smaller settlements that supported specialised economic activities and provided the demographic and resource foundations for Elamite political and military achievements. The decipherment of Elamite scripts presented particular challenges to scholars due to the unique characteristics of the Elamite language, and its complex relationship to other ancient languages of the Iranian Plateau and Mesopotamia. Unlike Akkadian cuneiform, which was deciphered through bilingual texts and known Semitic language relationships, Elamite remained an isolated language with no clear connections to contemporary linguistic families, requiring innovative approaches to understanding its grammatical structure and vocabulary. The breakthrough in Elamite linguistic studies came through the analysis of trilingual inscriptions from the Achaemenid period that included Elamite versions alongside Old Persian and Babylonian texts, providing scholars with parallel texts that enabled them to identify individual words and grammatical constructions through comparison with known languages. The Behistun inscription and similar trilingual monuments provided crucial data that established the foundation for understanding Elamite linguistic structure and developing translation capabilities for monolingual Elamite texts. The development of Elamite paleography, the study of ancient writing systems and their evolution over time, enabled scholars to trace the development of Elamite scripts from their earliest Proto-Elamite origins through the sophisticated Middle Elamite linear script that was employed for royal inscriptions and administrative documents during the height of Elamite political power. This paleographic analysis revealed the innovative character of Elamite writing systems and their important contributions to the development of writing technology in the ancient Near East. The linguistic analysis of Elamite texts has provided crucial insights into the structure and vocabulary of this ancient language, revealing grammatical features and lexical elements that have contributed to broader understanding of linguistic development in the ancient Iranian world. The identification of Elamite loanwords in other ancient languages, particularly Akkadian and Old Persian, has demonstrated the extent of cultural exchange and the influence of Elamite civilization on neighbouring societies that had previously been underestimated by modern scholarship. Contemporary research on Elamite civilization employs interdisciplinary approaches that combine traditional archaeological and textual analysis with scientific techniques from geology, climatology, and biological sciences to reconstruct comprehensive pictures of ancient Elamite society and its environmental context. These scientific approaches have revealed important information about ancient climate conditions, agricultural practices, and demographic patterns that have enhanced understanding of the factors that influenced Elamite political development and cultural achievements. Geophysical survey techniques, including ground-penetrating radar and magnetic detection systems, have enabled archaeologists to identify buried structures and settlement patterns without extensive excavation, providing new insights into the organization of Elamite cities and the extent of their territorial control. These non-invasive investigation methods have revealed previously unknown aspects of Elamite urban planning and architectural achievement while preserving archaeological sites for future research with improved techniques and analytical capabilities. The application of environmental archaeology to Elamite sites has provided detailed information about ancient agricultural systems, dietary patterns, and resource exploitation strategies that supported Elamite civilization over its long historical development. Analysis of plant and animal remains, soil samples, and water management systems has revealed the sophisticated environmental knowledge and technological capabilities that enabled Elamite communities to thrive in challenging environmental conditions while supporting substantial urban populations and complex political institutions. Digital documentation and virtual reconstruction technologies have revolutionized the study and presentation of Elamite archaeological discoveries, enabling scholars to create detailed three-dimensional models of ancient structures and artifacts that preserve precise information about their original appearance and construction techniques. These digital preservation methods ensure that crucial archaeological data will remain available for future research, even if original sites are damaged by development, conflict, or environmental degradation. The historical significance of Elamite civilization extends far beyond its immediate geographic boundaries and chronological limits to encompass its fundamental contributions to the development of Iranian cultural identity and political traditions that continue to influence Persian civilization throughout its subsequent history. The Elamite experience of governing diverse populations across extensive territories provided institutional models and administrative practices that were adapted and refined by later Iranian empires, contributing to their remarkable success in creating stable political systems that endured for centuries. The role of Elam as a cultural bridge between Mesopotamian and Persian civilizations facilitated the transmission of technological innovations, artistic traditions, and intellectual achievements that enriched both cultural spheres while contributing to the broader development of ancient Near Eastern civilization. Elamite craftsmen, scholars, and administrators served as intermediaries who adapted useful innovations from different cultural sources while developing distinctive synthetic traditions that combined elements from multiple sources in innovative ways. The persistence of Elamite cultural elements within later Iranian civilizations demonstrates the enduring value of institutional knowledge and cultural practices that had been developed through centuries of practical experience in governing complex societies and managing challenging environmental conditions. The survival of these cultural elements through successive periods of political transformation and foreign conquest testifies to their fundamental utility and their deep integration into the cultural fabric of southwestern Iranian society. The study of Elamite civilization has provided crucial insights into the processes of cultural development, political organization, and technological innovation that characterized early complex societies in the ancient world. The Elamite experience offers important comparative data for understanding how ancient civilizations adapted to environmental challenges, managed cultural diversity, and maintained political stability over extended periods of historical change. The rediscovery and ongoing study of Elamite civilization continues to yield new insights into the complexity and sophistication of ancient Near Eastern societies, challenging previous assumptions about the development of early civilizations and revealing the remarkable achievements of cultures that had been forgotten by later historical traditions. The preservation and interpretation of Elamite cultural heritage remains an important responsibility for contemporary scholars and the international community, ensuring that the achievements and contributions of this remarkable civilization will be preserved and understood by future generations who can benefit from the accumulated wisdom and experience of one of humanity's earliest and most successful experiments in complex political organization and cultural development.